Chapter 1065. He had always been the one tricking others, but this time he was tricked by Baisu. The fragrance of lilies was light and elegant, and the scent was very faint. After a long time, other than people like Rui who had sharp senses and a nose better than a dog's, it was impossible for ordinary people to smell it. He thought that Baisu had found her conscience and was grateful to him, but his kindness was not reciprocated. How petty could a woman be? Even if he had a clear conscience, he still felt guilty when he was stared at by these 5 pairs of eyes. Rui, come with me. He had to prove his innocence no matter what. Rui knew that Baisu liked women. Mississippi Lu had sharp eyes, so how could she fall for such a clumsy trick? He and Rui walked to the courtyard outside, and Baisu was still sparring with Shanning. Ahem. Li walked to her side and was almost choked to death by the strong perfume smell. This time it was the smell of roses. Mississippi Lu looked at him, waiting for him to explain. Li looked at Baisu, waiting for her to explain. It was still the smell of lilies just now, and she had sprayed so much rose perfume in less than 5 minutes. Wasn't it a waste? Shanning walked over, held Mississippi Lu's wrist and said, "Sister Rui, can you spar with me? My royal sister said that you are very good at martial arts, and there are still many things I don't understand that I want to ask you." A fresh and elegant smell came from her body. It was the smell of lilies. Mississippi Lu looked at Li, then turned to look at Shanning and said, "Okay, come with me to the courtyard inside." Cute girls were always popular, and even Mississippi Lu was no exception. Shanning was very popular when she was playful, and when she was obedient, she was even more popular. The one who was not popular was the small-chested, narrow-minded, cunning Baisu. Baisu glanced at him and said indifferently, "Consider yourself lucky this time. People with small chests don't have the right to speak." Li also glanced at her and walked back into the courtyard. Baisu's eyes were wide open, and her chest was heaving up and down. It looked like it was a little bigger. Shanning made everyone happy, especially after Li Xian went to the mountain. Without that eyesore, the atmosphere in the prince's mansion became much more harmonious. Li returned to his study and picked up a few letters. The letters were about the problems the fringe was facing. After reading the 2 letters, Mississippi Lu, who seemed to have just taken a shower, walked in with her wet hair. "That perfume just now was Baisu's, right?" "Ah. Baisu likes to use lily-scented perfume." Mississippi Lu tied up her hair and stood in front of the mirror. She said, "Don't worry, I won't misunderstand. Baisu won't like you and you won't like her." What? Li was puzzled. He could understand why Baisu wouldn't like him. After all, they had different sexual orientations. It was just like how he wouldn't like Fang or Li Xian. Why was Mississippi Lu so sure that he wouldn't like Baisu? Was it because she had small breasts? Because you don't like small breasts. Rui's words made it seem as if he had some discrimination against women with small breasts. Although there was a reason for this, it only accounted for 80%. She was narrow-minded, cunning, and unfeminine, which accounted for the remaining 20%. As drunk Mo's due date approached, the atmosphere in the prince's mansion became tense. Even Li Duan was much quieter than before. Several times he ran over to ask him and Rui if second mother was going to give birth to a younger brother or sister. The professionally trained delivery team was preparing 24 hours a day and resting in shifts. When Xiaotsue ran over and said that drunk Mo was about to give birth, the tense atmosphere in the prince's mansion reached its peak. Rui held his hand tightly. She was even more nervous than when she gave birth to her own child. Li wanted to go in to accompany her, but Rui's attitude was very firm. She said that it was unlucky for a man to enter the delivery room, but drunk Mo didn't agree. Li could only be superstitious. He didn't dare not to be superstitious. It was already a mystery that he could appear in this world. If he questioned the existence of gods at this time, who knew if he would be punished? After a long time, a midwife opened the door and came out. She smiled and said, "Congratulations, Prince. It's a little princess. Both mother and daughter are safe." Reward. Li breathed a sigh of relief and strode into the room. Yesterday was a joyous day in the prince's mansion. All the maids and servants were rewarded with a year's salary. All the servants who had worked in the prince's mansion knew that the prince was very generous to the servants. The salary they received was definitely not the number written on the surface. It was often more than 10 times or even dozens of times higher. It was said that the first midwife who came out yesterday to report that she was safe received a reward of 1,000 taels of silver. She was so excited that she fainted on the spot. When would the third madam be pregnant, and when would the princess be pregnant again? It was really something to look forward to. Before one became a father, one would never understand what it was like to be a father. The eldest daughter of the Li family fell asleep. Lying next to drunk Imo, Li Duan stood by the bed with his hands behind his back, watching without blinking. He had a younger sister and there would be someone to play with him in the future. Father said that he was the eldest brother, and he had to protect his younger sister in the future. As a man, he understood this even without father saying it. When his little sister grew up, he would be able to bring his little sister to play on the slide, swing, and buy her candied fruits and candied fruits. If there were any boys who used fake snakes to scare her, he would beat them up until they were looking for their teeth on the floor. Little Ant had said that when he grew up, she would teach him martial arts. Little Ant's martial arts were very powerful. She could beat father until he ran around everywhere. If he learned martial arts from her, he would definitely become as powerful as her. Li looked at this pair of children and once again felt that the heavens had treated him well. He had a few beautiful wives and a pair of children. Compared to his previous life when he was forced to go on blind dates everywhere, his life now was much better. That kick was not in vain and that fire was not in vain. Li Duan watched for a while and ran out. He wanted to find little Ant to teach him martial arts so that he could protect his younger sister. Drunk Imo leaned against the side of the bed and tilted her head. She looked at her daughter, who had not yet grown up, with a smile on her face. She had told Li a long time ago that she hoped to have a daughter. She could draw, sing and dance. Their daughter would inherit everything from her and become the little goddess of Luo Shui. The name of the young lady of the Li family was also something that she and Li had discussed a long time ago. Whether it was a boy or a girl, there were a few names that could be chosen. In the morning, Li and Drunk Imo deliberated for a while and chose one from among them. Li Mu. Mu meaning longing and attachment. Her name contained too much. Before he and Drunk Imo got together, they had gone through hardships and twists and turns. From Qing and prefecture to the capital, from the capital to the Qi kingdom, they had gone around in circles before they finally had the happiness they had today. Drunk Imo had expended too much energy yesterday. After Li coaxed her to sleep, he gently closed the door and walked into the yard. Rui sat alone at the stone table looking into the distance. Li walked over and sat beside her. He held her hand and asked in a low voice, "What are you thinking about?" Rui smiled and said, "Dwainer just went to find Rui. He said that he wanted to learn martial arts well so that he could protect his sister in the future." Li shook his head and said, "He is still too young to endure that hardship. Let's wait for another 2 years. Let's see if he can persevere. I have also started practicing basic skills since I was 3 years old." As she spoke, she leaned on Li's shoulder and murmured, "Can I have another child with my husband?" Because of her physique, it was difficult for Rui to get pregnant. The birth of Li Duan made Li's legs feel weak even now. He held her waist and said softly, "Yes, really, really?" Li nodded and said, "My wife, don't worry. We have plenty of time." Chapter 1066. Li wondered if it was in a woman's nature to forget her husband after giving birth. It was like this when Rui gave birth to Li Duan, and it was the same after Zuemo gave birth to Li Mu. The young princess of the Li family, Li Mu, was now the apple of everyone's eye. At home she was much more popular than Li Duan and himself. Li Duan wanted to learn Kung Fu from Mississippi Lu, so Mississippi Lu handed him over to Yang Liuqing for the time being. He swore to protect his sister, so he had to practice Kung Fu with tears in his eyes. Fortunately, although it was hard, he persevered. Li Duan was already 3.5 years old, so it would be good for him in the future if he could train his body a little. Women in confinement needed special care, so Li had not been idle these days. He had taken into consideration both nutrition and taste. He had put in a lot of effort. Li Xian had been in the land of chaos, and he had sent a letter saying that he would be back tomorrow. This also meant that they would not stay in Shuzhou for long, and they would be returning to the capital. Although one less Li Xian in the capital was not a big deal, he was still the emperor. Even if he could not stay in the capital, he could not always wander outside. So, Shanning had been in low spirits since yesterday. Li thought for a long time, then looked at her and said, "If he doesn't want to go back, let him go alone." Shanning raised her head and smiled. She said, "Gathering and parting. When there is gathering, there will be parting, and when there is parting, there will be reunion. Parting is for a better reunion. There is mother, sister, and many things to do in the capital. I can't always be outside." Li did not speak anymore. Shanning lowered her head and was silent for a while. Then she ran to the side, picked up a branch, and drew crisscrossed lines on the ground. She said, "Sir, let's play chess, beast chess." Beast chess was the first game that Li taught her, and it was also the first game that she knew. It was taught by Li to her, and after she carried it forward, It quickly became popular in the capital, especially among young children. She played very slowly and methodically. This made it difficult for Li Yi to use ultimate moves such as Little Dumbo, Tigger, and the universe's invincible Celestial Hound. Fortunately, he won and lost this time, and the probability of winning and losing was between 50 and 50. This made him even more sad. He knew that in chess he would never have a chance to surpass Shanning in his life. He could not believe that she could actually win and lose one game, and she could not win one game more. As the game went on, even Bai Su, who was standing behind, saw it and looked at him with slight contempt. So the game of chess could not go on. He looked at the time, and it was almost time to prepare dinner. These days, Drunk Ink's food was taken care of by him alone, including the ingredients, and he personally went to the market to pick the freshest. Shanning carried a small cloth bag and followed behind him, just like a little attendant. These days, except for sleeping in very few times, she would hardly leave his side more than 5 steps. If it were not for Bai Su also following behind, this must have been a flawless day. Su seemed to have made a breakthrough recently. Li Yi had not seen him for several days, but it did not matter. He just went out to buy vegetables, and he did not need a guru to escort him every time. What's more, although Bai Su had a small chest, a small heart, and a lot of shortcomings, her advantages were also very obvious. 8th on the heaven list, she was definitely a qualified bodyguard. With Fang in Yong County, she could almost do whatever she wanted. Coincidentally, they met Yang Fu and the others on the street. The old man with the surname Wang, Yang Fu, and a few guards walked slowly on the street, talking to Yang Fu as they walked. In the past, old man Wang often asked him some questions or talked about some things about the Jing kingdom. Later, for unknown reasons, he rarely came. Instead, when he was talking to Yang Fu about the way of the emperor, the latter often fell asleep on the table. Li Yi could understand Yang Fu because the prime minister's voice had a unique charm, even he wanted to sleep when he heard it. Your Highness Jianghu of Silla. The old man with the surname Wang also saw him, and cupped his hands to salute him. Li Yi looked at him. Prime Minister, this is... The old man with the surname Wang cupped his hands and said, Shuzhou used to be the poorest and most chaotic place in the Jing kingdom, but in just 2 years, it has become so prosperous and rich. This old man brought His Highness King Jing out to have a look, hoping that your highness can learn something from it. Li Yi looked at Yang Fu and found that his eyes were staring at the fruit-candied haws on the street stalls, and there was a look of longing in his eyes. He felt that old man Wang was still a little too hasty. So what if he learned it? The reason why Shuzhou had become the Shuzhou it was now was not only because of its unique geographical advantage, but also because it was his territory, and he could do whatever he wanted. The Wu kingdom was still in someone else's hands. Even if Yang Fu learned it, it would be in vain. Li Yi bought a fruit-candied haw for Shanning and Yang Fu, and the longing and envy on Yang Fu's face disappeared. Just as he was about to wave goodbye to them, a group of carriages slowly drove over from afar. The man in the lead looked left and right and suddenly walked over. He asked the old man with the surname Wang, May I ask, old man, how do I get to the Yong County government? The old man didn't answer but looked at him and asked, Are you from the Wu kingdom? The man was surprised. Old man, how do you know? The old man with the surname Wang thought about it and said, If this old man guessed correctly, you should be from the Zhangzhou of the Wu kingdom, right? The man's face was even more surprised and he sighed, Strange old man, could it be that you're a fortune teller? Seeing that he admitted it, the old man with the surname Wang shook his head and said, If you're not from the Zhangzhou, how can you have a Zhangzhou accent? Although this old man is old, his ears are still good, and I can still recognize the dialect of my hometown. Leaving home at a young age and coming back when he was old, his accent never changed and his hair on his temples withered. Although Elder Wang's experience had nothing to do with this poem, to be able to meet someone from his hometown in a foreign country was something worth celebrating no matter what. The old man surnamed Wang looked at the group and asked, What are you doing here? The man sighed and said, Old man, you might not know this, but Zhangzhou has fallen into the hands of that dog of a court, and the people have no way to live. We were originally merchants of Zhangzhou, but we were really forced by that dog of a court to be afraid, so we thought of coming to Shuzhou to find a way to survive. He sighed and said, It's better when Her Royal Highness is here. It's a pity that Her Royal Highness... There were many merchants from the Qi Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom in Shuzhou. As long as they were doing proper business, they would not be discriminated against here after registering in the county government. The old man with the surname Wang naturally knew about these things. However, he was originally the Prime Minister of the Wu Kingdom. Now that he saw that the people of the Wu Kingdom had no choice but to flee to a neighboring country to avoid disaster, He only felt sorrow in his heart, and a certain belief in his heart became even more resolute. You don't know where the Yong County government is? The man looked at him and said with a smile, let's ask someone else. The old man surnamed Wang shook his head and pointed ahead with a somewhat depressed expression. He said, the Yong County government is just in front. Thank you, old man. The man cupped his hands at him and turned to look at the group behind him. He said, it's been a long journey and we're almost there. Everyone hold on a little longer. A group of more than 10 people pulled 4 carriages. The carriages were filled with children's toys such as windmills, rattledrums, masks, wooden swords and wooden swords. When the last carriage passed by, a man casually took down a windmill from the carriage and handed it to Yang Fu, who was standing by the side of the road licking the candied haws. He said with a smile, little brother, this is for you. Yang Fu was licking the candied haws and subconsciously reached out to take it. Suddenly, a tender voice came from behind him. Dodge. The man held the windmill with a kind smile on his face. However, when his hand was halfway through, a trace of viciousness quickly appeared on his face. His speed suddenly increased and from the gap between his index and middle fingers, a bit of blue light shone out. Chapter 1067. While Yang Fu was frozen in place, Shou Ning kicked the man's hand away. The kindness on the man's face turned into ruthlessness. He suddenly withdrew his arm and his fist, which was glowing with blue light, smashed toward her calf. Of course he didn't have the chance. Bai Su sent him flying with a kick. With just one kick he could no longer get up. The poisonous needle between his fingers fell to the ground, glowing blue in the sunlight. The merchant from the Wu Kingdom, who had asked the old man surnamed Wang for the direction of the county government, had one hand in the carriage but he couldn't pull it out. He lowered his head and found a hand pressing his wrist. When he turned his head, the strong man next to the young man grinned at him and said with a smile, "What do you want?" Then everything went black and he felt a great pain in his neck. He lost consciousness. The old man surnamed Wang instantly reacted and shouted, "Protect His Highness." Yang Fu had already been surrounded by a few guards who had accompanied him. The dozen or so people had already drawn their swords and sabers. Li Yi stood motionless while Bai Su protected Shou Ning. Old Fong was like a black bear, killing one person with each slap. His fighting style was so violent that normal people would not be able to withstand a single slap from him. This group of people could be considered to have some skills, but they were no match for Old Fong, who was a beast in human form. He was strong and fast, giving them no time to react at all. In just a few breaths, no one could even stand and speak. Since second granduncle's devilish training, Fong was the best weapon against enemies who weren't strong individually and had a large number of people. The old man surnamed Wang was relieved and hurriedly said, His Highness King Jing, His Highness is here." A voice came from behind. The old man surnamed Wang turned his head and saw the 2 guards next to King Jing lying on the ground, each holding one of their arms. Their faces were full of shock and disbelief. The other 2 bodyguards placed their weapons against the pale-faced Imperial Prince Jing's neck. It was hard to guard against a thief in the family. Li Yi looked at the old man surnamed Wang and said in disbelief, "There's a traitor among you." No matter how meticulous Shanning's observation was, no matter how brave Fong was, and no matter how powerful Bai Su was, they couldn't stand the fact that there was a traitor among Yang Fu's guards. Li Yi was a little disappointed. What kind of soldiers did his martial nephew have? There were only a few of them, and among them, there were even traitors planted by others to stab them in the back at critical moments. Old man Wang's expression changed greatly. He pointed at them and said with a trembling voice, You, we let His Highness escape last time in the Thorn's Ridge. If we fail again this time, His Majesty will not let us off." A guard looked at the old man surnamed Wang and said, "Prepare 2 fast horses for us and send us to the Qi Kingdom. Otherwise I will kill King Jing right now." The old man's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as he said angrily, "How dare you?" The man sneered and said, "I'm going to die either way. It's worth it if I can drag King Jing down with me before I die." Yang Fu's face was already pale and bloodless. He shouted, "No, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. Prime Minister, give them horses, give them horses." The old man surnamed Wang looked at Li Yi. Li Yi looked in Yang Fu's direction. That knife was on his neck and there was already a trace of blood. With just a light cut, Yang Luqing would have to rebel and become the empress. After thinking about it carefully, Li Yi hurriedly suppressed this immoral idea. He looked at the old man surnamed Wang and lightly shook his head. Shaking his head meant that it was too dangerous. If they weren't careful, they would have to let their princess become the empress, so he agreed to their conditions for the time being. The old man surnamed Wang clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, "Fine, I promise you, don't hurt King Jing." "Wait a moment." The guard looked left and right, then suddenly opened his mouth and said. He pointed at Shanning, who was protected by Bai Su, and said, "Let her come over." The old man surnamed Wang was startled. Li narrowed his eyes slightly. Yang Fu, who had the knife on his neck, seemed to see a glimmer of hope. He shouted, "Yes, she is the princess of the Jing kingdom. She is more important than me, she is more important than me. Just tie her up. Let me go, let me go." The old man surnamed Wang's body swayed. He looked at Yang Fu as if he was looking at a stranger. His lips trembled, but he couldn't say a word. If it weren't for this little princess, King Jing would have been dead. How could he say such a thing? His body also began to tremble. His eyes dimmed and his face was ashen. The guard had just said it casually. He could only see that the girl was of noble status, but he didn't expect her to be so noble. If he tied her up, wouldn't their chances of escaping be greater? He pointed at Shanning again and said loudly, "Let her come over or I will kill King Jing right now. If we die together." "Then let's kill her." Li walked over and took Shanning's hand. He said, "Let's go home. If we go home late, the fish won't be fresh." It was because the fish purchased by the residents wasn't fresh that he and Shanning came out to buy live fish. If the fish were dead, they would have to come out to buy it again. He looked back at Fang and said, "Don't forget to have someone clean the floor later." The two guards looked at him with a stunned and shocked expression. "Then kill him." This was King Jing, not some random cat or dog. How could he just kill him? If he killed King Jing, what reason could the princess and the others have to rebel? How could this person do this? "You want to harm me, you want to harm me." Yang Fu's face became even paler. His face was full of despair. He shouted, "My royal sister will not let you go, my royal sister will not let you go." Li sighed. He didn't sigh for Yang Fu but for himself. He thought that Yang Fu was just a naughty and spoiled child. As long as he put in some effort, he would be able to bring him back to the right path. Obviously he was too naive. The surrounding crowd had already retreated when the group of people took action. They were watching from afar. You. One of the guards pointed at Li Yi and said angrily, "Don't think that I don't dare to do it." Li Yi waved his hand. "You do it. I'm watching." The two of them were stunned. They didn't know whether to advance or retreat. After two strange sounds, the two of them fell to the ground at the same time. There were two swallowtail darts stuck between their eyebrows. Yang Fu also fell to the ground. There was a stench coming from his lower body. Li Yi looked at Bai Su, who was holding two darts in her hands. Bai Su turned to look at him at the same time. He swore in his heart that he would never laugh at her for having a small chest again. The Yamen runners began to separate the crowd and gathered here. Fang pointed at the dozen people on the ground and said, "Take them back to the county office first." Then he pointed at the two people with darts between their eyebrows and said, "Take the bodies away." The old man surnamed Wang came to his senses. His eyes were dull. He looked at King Jing, who was paralyzed on the ground and had lost control of his bowels. He walked over and slowly squatted down. He didn't mind it. He picked him up and walked toward the crowd step by step. Ouch! The crowd dispersed. Hearing the sound, Li Yi hurriedly turned his head and looked at Shanning. He asked with concern, "What's wrong?" She frowned and whispered, "I was careless just now and sprained my ankle. Go back and ask Sister Rui to take a look at it." Li Yi squatted down to check and found that it was not serious. It was just a little swollen. He must have sprained his ankle. He turned his back to her and said, "Get up." Shanning blushed. She lay on Li Yi's back and put her arms around his neck. She said with a red face, This is not good." He had never seen anyone so happy after spraining their ankle. Li Yi tilted his head and looked at her. Shanning put her arms around his neck and asked, "Sir, I sprained my ankle. Can I not go back to the capital right away?" "Go back to the capital? Let's recover first." Li Yi turned his head and said angrily. She lay on Li Yi's back with a happy smile on her face. She felt that the pain in her ankle was not as bad anymore. Li Yi carried Shanning on his back. He looked at Bai Su, who was walking beside him, and suddenly said, "Miss Bai." Ever since he saw her skill with darts, he felt that as a man he shouldn't be too stingy. He should take the initiative to find a chance to repair their relationship. "What?" Bai Su crossed her arms and glanced at him. She said emotionlessly, "I have a few secret recipes here." He glanced at her chest and said, "They can improve your figure?" Bai Su was stunned at first. After she understood what he meant, she immediately blushed and said angrily, "What do you mean?" "Pretend I didn't say anything." Li shook his head. Since she didn't care, he wouldn't say anything. Shanning lay on his back and giggled. Bai Su lowered her head and remained silent. After a while, she turned to look at him and asked softly, "The secret recipes you mentioned really work?" Chapter 1068. Li didn't expect Bai Su, who could only be considered half a woman, to care about her figure. He generously told her the secret recipe of the breast enhancement soup. He didn't have to worry that the effect wouldn't make her angrier. After all, this was personally tested by Emingzu. Bai Su wasn't even as good as Emingzu in the past, so the effect would definitely be more obvious. No matter how stingy this woman was after drinking his soup, she wouldn't stab him with a dart, right? Shanning's ankle was really sprained, but it wasn't too serious. Rui took a look and massaged her for a while. She told her that as long as she had a good rest, she would recover in 3 to 5 days. Who would have thought that after Rui warned her for a while, she couldn't help but get out of bed. As a result, she tripped at the door and sprained her ankle even more seriously. This time, it wouldn't be a matter of 3 to 5 days. She would have to rest in bed for at least a month to ensure that she would recover to the same state as before she was injured and not leave any future problems. As her injury worsened, she seemed to be even happier. When Li walked out of her room, he actually heard her humming a tune. Jianghu had already taken a shower and used a lot of soap. There wasn't a trace of the stench on his body anymore. There wasn't a single guard in the room, so he felt more at ease. He was afraid of guards now. Prime Minister Wang stood in the middle of the hall. There was a brown stain on his body that emitted a foul smell. The smell made Jianghu want to vomit, but he couldn't vomit because it was the smell he got when the Prime Minister carried him back after he had lost control of his bladder. He still hadn't recovered from today's events. He had nearly died when the man had handed him the windmill. When the guard had put his sword to his throat, he had nearly died. He touched his neck. There was a blood stain on it and it still hurt a little when he touched it. If the knife was a little sharper, his head wouldn't be on his neck anymore. Fortunately, everything was over. That man actually let those 2 traitors kill him. When his imperial sister returned, he must tell her about this. "Your Highness." The old man surnamed Wang ignored the stench on his body and took a few steps forward. Prime Minister." Jianghu raised his head and looked at him. He didn't know why, but although the Prime Minister was very calm at this moment, he felt that the Prime Minister was very scary. Prime Minister Wang walked in front of Jianghu and slowly sat down. He asked, "Your Highness, do you still remember the way of the Emperor that I taught you?" I remember everything." Jianghu was overjoyed and immediately said, "To be an emperor, one man is the heavens. With great power in hand, one must judge the situation, make the best use of everything, make the best use of people, have a broad heart to accommodate the world, and have a broad mind to accommodate all rivers. As an emperor, there is no need for him to be knowledgeable. He may not be able to compose good poems or write beautiful essays, but he must have the spirit of an emperor." He secretly rejoiced that he had memorized this part. Who knew that Prime Minister Wang would test him at this time? The old man nodded and asked, "Does your Highness know what the spirit of an emperor is?" Jianghu was startled. He then shook his head and said, The Prime Minister didn't teach me." The old man thought about it and let out a long sigh. He slowly said, "I indeed didn't teach you. But your Highness must remember that some things don't need to be taught. If you don't teach me, how would I?" Jianghu secretly muttered in his heart, but his face revealed an enlightened expression. He said, "Jianghu will definitely follow the Prime Minister's teachings and learn the way of the Emperor." The old man shook his head and said, "Your Highness doesn't need to learn these things in the future? Really?" Jianghu raised his eyebrows and was overjoyed. The way of the Emperor was too long for him to memorize. It would be best if he didn't have to learn it in the future. "Your Highness doesn't need to complete your daily homework in the future. Do whatever you want to do." The old man waved his hand and didn't look at Jianghu again. He turned around and left. Jianghu was still standing there in a daze. In the future, he didn't need to learn anything and could do whatever he wanted? This was supposed to be a happy thing, but why did he feel a chill in his heart? Yang Liuqing quickly walked into the courtyard and hurriedly asked, "Is the Prime Minister and Jianghu okay?" She only heard that Prime Minister Wang and Jianghu were assassinated outside today, so she hurried back. Wei Liang, who was waiting here, immediately said, "Your Highness, the Prime Minister and King Jing are fine." Yang Liuqing asked, "Where are they?" "King Jing is in his room." Wei Liang said, "The Prime Minister is also in his room. The Prime Minister said that if your Highness comes back, please go and see him first." Yang Liuqing nodded and quickly walked to a courtyard. She knocked on the door. After a long time, a hoarse voice came from the room. "Come in." Yang Liuqing pushed the door and entered. Prime Minister Wang was standing in the room. He was wearing an official robe and a high crown. He knelt down in front of her and said in a deep voice, "I'm sorry, the former emperor." "I'm sorry, your Highness." Yang Liuqing was shocked and hurried forward to help him up. She said, "Yang Fu is not injured. Prime Minister, you don't have to blame yourself. I'm not referring to today's assassination." The old man with the surname Wang shook his head and said, "Before the former emperor passed away, he entrusted King Jing to me. He hoped that I could set things right and support King Jing as the emperor. But I'm afraid that I can't fulfill the former emperor's last wish." Yang Liuqing's face turned pale. She looked at him and asked in a trembling voice, "Prime Minister, what do you mean?" The old man looked at her and asked, "Your Highness, do you know what happened today?" Yang Liuqing shook her head. "That little princess saved him. If it wasn't for that little princess of the Jing kingdom, would King Jing still be alive?" The old man with the surname Wang closed his eyes and said in a sorrowful voice, "But what is he doing? He wants to exchange his savior's life for his own. Such a heartless person who is worse than a beast, what right does he have to sit on that throne?" He knelt down again. Tears streamed down his face. He said in a hoarse voice, "I'm sorry, the former emperor entrusted me. I didn't teach him well." Yang Liuqing stood there in a daze. She couldn't come back to her senses for a long time. Her father and brother were killed. Her mother was forced to commit suicide. They had been on the run, gathered their forces and gradually fought back. They only had one goal. They wanted to suppress Emperor Wu, who killed his brother and father. They wanted to support the former emperor's son, King Jing, as the emperor. Giving up on King Jing meant giving up on themselves. Without this reason they were traitors and plotting a rebellion. It made a big difference to them whether King Jing became the emperor or not. However, as Prime Minister Wang said, Yang Fu, he didn't deserve to be the emperor. "That's good." After a long silence, a smile of relief finally appeared on her face. She helped Prime Minister Wang up and said, "Let General Wei and General Chen dismiss those officers and soldiers. Let them divide the rest of the money. I've always made a mistake. In fact, your Highness has also made this mistake." The old man shook his head and said, "King Jing is only King Jing. He can't represent anyone except himself. He can't represent the officers and soldiers and he can't represent the world." Yang Liuqing was startled and looked at him. The old man knelt down again and kowtowed to Yang Liuqing 3 times. When he raised his head, his expression was solemn. He said in a loud voice, "I beg your Highness, for the sake of the former emperor's last wish, for the sake of the people of the Wu kingdom, to suppress the traitors, to ascend the throne." Chapter 1069. Suppress the rebels and ascend the throne as the emperor. Yang Liuqing looked at Prime Minister Wang, who had a solemn expression on his face. His lips parted and he said with difficulty, How is this possible? Why is it not possible?" Prime Minister Wang raised his head and looked at her with bright eyes. He asked, "Your Highness has been in the Jing kingdom for a long time. Do you know the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom?" Yang Liuqing nodded subconsciously. The eldest princess of the Jing kingdom, Li Emingzu, was unparalleled in beauty and martial arts. She also had the ability to govern the country. She was close friends with her martial uncle. She was her master's strong rival in love. Prime Minister Wang gritted his teeth and said, "Since the Jing kingdom has a princess in charge, why can't our Wu kingdom have an empress?" "But," Prime Minister Wang looked at her and continued to ask, "Your Highness, do you think that we can still pin our hopes on Imperial Prince Jing?" Yang Liuqing shook her head. "If that's the case." Prime Minister Wang kowtowed again and said loudly, "This old official sincerely requests your Highness to ascend the throne." The door was pushed open with great force and 2 figures walked in quickly. Wei Liang knelt down on one knee, raised his head and said loudly, "This official sincerely requests your Highness to ascend the throne." Qin Qing knelt down next to Wei Liang and said respectfully, "This official sincerely requests your Highness to ascend the throne." Yang Liuqing looked at their solemn expressions and couldn't help but take a few steps back. A certain sturdy wall in his heart seemed to be shaken at this moment. Li Yi used the extremely sharp dagger that Mississippi Lu gave him to make a crutch for Shanning. If she really had to lie in bed for a month, she would probably die of boredom. In order to stay here for a longer period of time, she purposely sprained her ankle and worsened her injury. Li Yi was angry and distressed. She wanted to find a suitable reason to stay. Why did she need to do this? When Li Xian came back tomorrow, she could pretend to break his leg by accident and let him stay here for a year or so. Wouldn't that be simpler and more effective? Fang walked in from outside and said, "Son-in-law, those guys were still stubborn at first, pretending to be tough guys. Later on, after a little torture, they were all released. The so-called tough guy was only relatively speaking." Fang's, a little bit of torture, was definitely not as simple as he said. However, this was no longer important. He polished the edges and corners of his walking stick and casually asked, "Were they sent by the emperor of the Wu kingdom?" "Yes and no." Fang shook his head. After thinking for a moment, he said, "They are not merchants of the Wu kingdom. They are all killers. The heads of Princess Duanrong and Prince Jing are worth 100,000 taels of silver each." Someone sent an invitation to the martial arts world of the Wu kingdom. If anyone can catch Princess Duanrong and that bastard Jianghu, no matter whether they are dead or alive, they will offer 200,000 taels of silver with both hands. 200,000 taels of silver as a reward for two people was undoubtedly a big deal. The one who had such a deep hatred for them and wanted them dead the most was the emperor of the Wu kingdom. To be exact, Yang Liuqing had a deep hatred for him. He was just worried that they would threaten his throne. Fang continued to say, "The two of them are currently the highest on the bounty list. They should have been targeted by many killers. A month ago, someone spread the news that they are in Shuzhou. As for the two guards, they may be spies of the imperial court of the Wu kingdom. They have been hiding around them for a long time. This time they should want to take advantage of them. However, I didn't expect that woman." Seeing Baisu coming out of Shanning's room, Fang glanced at her and continued to say, "I didn't expect Baisu to be so good at martial arts. Her skill in using concealed weapons is even superb and exquisite. It is rare in the human world and hard to find in the heavens. In short, Miss Yang and the others have been targeted by many people. If they go out alone, they should be extra careful." After Fang finished speaking, Yang Liuqing walked in from outside with Yang Fu. "Kneel down." When she walked up to Li Yi, she glanced at Yang Fu, who had his head lowered, and said coldly, "Plop." Although Yang Fu was full of reluctance, he still knelt in front of Li Yi. Yang Liuqing looked at Li Yi with an extremely complicated expression. After a long time, he slowly said, "Yang Fu is ungrateful and did such a thing. It's all because I didn't discipline him well. Please punish me, martial uncle. You are you and he is he." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "You have been secretly offered a bounty in the Wu kingdom. The bounty is 100,000 taels of silver for each of you. There should be countless people targeting you. When you go out, be more careful. In addition, I don't know if there are spies of the imperial court among your people. It's better to thoroughly investigate them. Don't let today's incident happen again." "I understand." Yang Liuqing nodded, glanced at Yang Fu and said, "Yang Fu, you go and kneel outside." Yang Fu didn't dare to disobey him, so he knelt outside. When the maids and servants passed by him, they couldn't help pointing at him. "This is the King Jing of the Wu kingdom. He's still a prince. He's ungrateful and returns kindness with enmity. At such a young age, his heart is already so vicious. When he grows up..." Yang Liuqing didn't say how long he wanted Yang Fu to kneel, but he only knelt for less than 10 hours before he fainted. It was unknown whether he was embarrassed or kneeling. A person's bad nature was completely revealed in this 14-year-old child. If he wasn't a child, or if he wasn't Yang Liuqing's younger brother, Li Yi would let him know the price of doing wrong and saying wrong things. However, he didn't have the slightest interest in Yang Fu. This child was already useless. Whether they wanted to live in seclusion in the countryside or wanted to continue to rebel and support Yang Fu as the emperor, it had nothing to do with him. He had to look after Shanning. He was worried that she hadn't recovered from her foot injury and would jump out of bed again. In the afternoon, Old Man Wang came to find him. At that time he was massaging Shanning's sprained foot. She was giggling because of the itch. The massage technique was taught to him by Baisu. She said that she didn't want to owe others a favor. In the martial arts world, it's not a burden to have more skills. Looking at the horoscope to predict one's luck, relaxing the muscles and blood, massaging to set the bones, rebellion. These skills, it was better to learn one more. Who knew when it would come in handy? Old Man Wang knocked on the door and stood at the door. He asked, "Your Highness Jiang of Silla, can I have a word with you?" Shanning smiled every time she massaged her foot. Li Yi had long wanted to run away from the door. Those who didn't know would think that he was abducting an ignorant girl inside. Li Yi walked into the courtyard and sat beside the stone table. Old man Wang sat opposite him. Your Highness Jianghu of Silla and the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom, Li Emingzu, must be very close, right? Li Yi looked at old man Wang. He didn't know what he meant by this question. He waved his hand and said modestly, just SOSO. Old man Wang looked at him and asked, then what does Jianghu of Silla think about Princess Duanrong compared to the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom? Li Yi thought for a while and shook his head regretfully. In terms of appearance at this level, there was actually no difference between them. It could only be said that each had their own merits. Emingzu was the domineering empress type. Although Yang Liuqing was a princess, she was the pretty daughter of a humble family. Their identities were not much different. In terms of martial arts, they were far apart. In terms of breasts, they were not far apart in the past, but now they were far apart. In general, they were still not as good as Emingzu. Old man Wang seemed to agree with his conclusion and nodded. His eyes were slightly dim as he said, the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom is a genius. Your Highness is indeed not as good as her. Li Yi was a little puzzled. For no reason, why did old man Wang compare Yang Liuqing and Emingzu? He wasn't as free as him. He still had to boil bone soup for Shanning to nourish her body. He stood up and said, Prime Minister Wang, if there is nothing else, I will leave first. The soup is still boiling in the pot. Prime Minister Wang raised his head and suddenly looked at him. His eyes flashed and he asked, Jianghu of Silla, if we want to support Her Highness as the Empress, is there any possibility of success? Li Yi looked at him and was stunned for a while. Seeing Xiao Huan and Xiao Cui walking into the courtyard, he turned his head and said, Xiao Huan, go and see if the bone soup in the kitchen is ready. Don't overheat it. Then he said to Xiao Cui, go and brew a pot of tea. Prime Minister Wang's train of thought is very strange. Li Yi looked at him and sat down again. He praised, I admire it very much. Chapter 1070. Pedantic, conservative, conformist, stubborn. This was Li Yi's impression of Geezer Wang. In reality, it wasn't just him. These high-ranking officials and old men all had similar images in his eyes. Only now did he realize that he was wrong, completely wrong. He shouldn't have looked at people with colored glasses, shouldn't have been biased, and shouldn't have used a single point to cover the whole. He had committed the most common mistake in the world. How was this the stubborn old prime minister? This was simply a pioneer with an avant-garde ideology. In the era without the Wu woman, Geezer Wang's ideology was hundreds or even thousands of years ahead of the rest of the world. What kind of ideological realm was this? Li Yi took a sip of tea, looked at him and asked, if I support Princess Duanrong as the Empress, what will happen to King Jing? Geezer Wang should have already thought of this problem. Without any thought or hesitation he said, I will announce to the public that King Jing was ambushed by a traitor sent by Emperor Wu and unfortunately died. That traitor killed his brother and father, and now he even wants to assassinate his own brother. He has lost his virtue and has lost the mandate of heaven. The people of the Wu kingdom should rise up and rebel against the tyranny. To be able to think of even this kind of method, Geezer Wang's image in Li Yi's mind was invisibly raised by another level. This is a good idea. Li Yi nodded. It was a rebellion after all. The most important thing at the beginning was to find a reason, such as a tyrannical ruler, losing the mandate of heaven, the fall of the Emperor's star, the coming of purple chi from the east. With this as an excuse, the rest of the operation would be carried out in a logical manner. Jianghu of Silla is a genius who has assisted the Jing kingdom in its resurgence. He is experienced and knowledgeable, so he must be able to see further than this old man. Geezer Wang looked at him and said, this old man only has one question. Is it possible to support a woman as the Empress? Li Yi put down his teacup and said with a smile, Prime Minister Wang, have you heard of an old saying? Geezer Wang looked at him and asked, what old saying? Anything is possible. The old man surnamed Wang thought for a moment and asked, may I know who said this? An ancient person with the surname Li once said that everything is possible. Li Yi smiled and said, this sentence is for Prime Minister Wang. Anything is possible? The old man surnamed Wang repeated these words over and over again. After a while, he stood up and bowed respectfully to Li Yi. Thank you, Jianghu of Silla. In the eyes of the world, a woman becoming an empress was undoubtedly a fantasy. Several months ago, even he could not accept it. However, too many things had happened in the past few months. First, Imperial Prince Jing had no talent or virtue, which made him thoroughly disappointed. Then the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom took charge of the government and rapidly rose to power, which also caused his mentality to change greatly. The Wu kingdom was different from the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom. If he wanted to change the current situation, he had to open up a new path. This path was unprecedented since ancient times. It was the first path since the beginning of the world. He did not know if this path would work until he received confirmation from Jianghu of Silla. He came to ask him only to get confirmation. This would be his unwavering direction in the future. Prime Minister, you're too kind? Li Yi waved his hand and asked with interest. A woman becoming an empress is something that has never happened in history. Why did Prime Minister Wang suddenly think of supporting Princess Duanrong as the empress? I'm afraid it's not just because Imperial Prince Jing has lost his virtue, right? The old man surnamed Wang asked in return. Since the Jing kingdom has an empress, why can't our Wu kingdom have one? Li Yi said in surprise. Since when did the Jing kingdom have an empress? Although she doesn't have the title of empress, she is the real empress. The old man surnamed Wang said with certainty. The Jing kingdom's emperor is muddle-headed and lazy. He is thousands of miles away from the capital city. All the affairs in the court, big or small, are handled by the eldest princess, Li Emingzu. If she isn't the empress, then what is she? Cough. Li covered his mouth and coughed softly. The old man surnamed Wang waved his sleeve. The Jing kingdom needs a vice emperor, but the Wu kingdom doesn't need one. We only need to support the eldest princess as the empress. As for the other matters, we'll discuss them after we've cleared out the rebels. Li took a sip of tea to moisten his throat. This time he did not have to cough anymore. Li Xian walked over from behind and put his arm around the old man surnamed Wang's shoulder. He smiled and said, Come and tell me. Tell me why the Jing kingdom's emperor is muddle-headed. Who did it? Li Xian had returned half a day earlier. When he found out that Shanning was injured, he was extremely angry. He looked at Li Yi and said angrily, I've only been gone for a few days and you've already injured Shanning. How did you protect her? How can I be at ease when I hand her over to you in the future? Li could not refute this matter. Shanning used her other uninjured leg to hop over and said, Brother, it's not Mister's fault. It's all my fault. Where's the assassin? Who sent him? Li Xian's anger had not dissipated. How dare he assassinate the Jing kingdom's princess? I'm going to hack him into pieces. The Wu kingdom's emperor. Li looked at him and said, The assassin was sent by the Wu kingdom's emperor. Why don't you send your troops to wipe out the Wu kingdom? I'll lend you the red barbarian cannon and give you a 20% discount on the new weapons. Li Xian quickly calmed down. The war between the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom and the Zhao kingdom had just subsided for less than 2 years. They were still at the stage of stabilizing the national economy. It was impossible for them to wipe out the Wu kingdom for no reason. Even if Li Xian agreed, the courtiers would not agree. Li Xian had nowhere to vent his anger. He gritted his teeth and said, I'll go and see how the old man's writing is going. Meditate and reflect on one's own mistakes. Don't talk about other people's wrongs while chatting. This ancient saying was very good. Don't speak ill of others behind their backs. Because old man Wang spoke ill of Li Xian behind his back, he was taken down by 2 imperial consecrators on the spot. The 2 consecrators were older than him, and there was no such thing as respecting the old and loving the young. Li Xian did not make things difficult for him. He just locked him in his room and made him write a 5,000-word reflection. The content of the reflection was to praise him, saying that he was wise and mighty, indomitable, talented and good-looking, and a famous ruler throughout the ages. Li Yi felt that old man Wang, as the prime minister, should not lack a 5,000-word vocabulary. If Li Xian did not vent his anger on him, it should not be a problem for him to double the number of words. As it turned out, Li Xian did not do things in such a low-end way. He only made old man Wang read what he had written with great emotion. According to an imperial guard who did not want to be named, the old man fell down before he finished half of the content. When he fell down, he vomited and had diarrhea. It was extremely miserable. Li Yi had not seen old man Wang for 3 days, and it had also been 3 days since he saw Yang Fu. In these 3 days, Yang Liuqing did chores such as cleaning the courtyard and drying the clothes as usual. She was more like a servant girl of the Li family than a princess. She never talked much. She just buried herself in her work and had little communication with Rui. Until the morning of the 3rd day, the weather was sunny and the breeze was gentle. Li came out to bask in the sun with Shanning in his arms and played chess with her casually. Rui stood behind him and watched the game. Many times she expressed her disdain for his loss to Shanning. Rui, Ruoqing and third Miss Chen took turns to take Li Mu from Zue Mo's hands and walked around the yard with her in their arms. A little further away, Yang Liuqing was helping Li Duan correct his movements. Under her guidance, Li Duan had been able to play a complete set of boxing. Of course, his fist technique only had the form, it did not have any power. Compared with Shanning, Li Yi's chess skills seemed very bad, or even no chess skills at all. So it made Mississippi Lu have the illusion that she could also beat him. This illusion was completely dispelled after 5 consecutive defeats. On the other side, Yang Liuqing touched Li Duan's head and said, "Well, that's all for today. Go and play." Li Duan cupped his hands to her in a chivalrous manner and ran to the other side to see his sister. Yang Liuqing turned around and saw that her master was blaming Uncle Li Yi for losing the game. The place where Uncle Rui was also warm. She looked at the situation in this small courtyard and couldn't help smiling. For her, there was no place in this world that could compare to this place. She stood in the shadow of the trees, facing a warm and harmonious family. When she turned around, there were only knives, spears, swords, halberds, mountains of corpses and seas of blood. She walked out of the shadow of the trees and into the sun, but it seemed that she had walked into the deeper shadow. She walked to Li Yi and Rui with a smile on her face and said, "Master, Uncle, I'm here to say goodbye to you." Chapter 1071. Mississippi Lu's disciple did not belong here. Li Yi had long known that this day would come. Her injuries had healed a long time ago, and her martial arts had also improved. These days she had never mentioned a certain matter, but it did not mean that she had let it go or forgotten it. In her eyes, there was the great hatred of her parents and brothers, as well as the people of the Wu Kingdom. She could let it go for a while, but she could not let it go forever. Mississippi Lu held a chess piece in her hand, and after a moment of silence she asked, "When are you leaving?" Yang Liuqing lowered his head and said, "Tomorrow." Mississippi Lu put down the chess piece and said, "Got it. Master Martial Uncle, I will leave first." She lowered her head and fell silent. After a long time, she said in a low voice and turned to leave. When she reached the gate of the courtyard, her footsteps paused. With this step, she would be in 2 completely different worlds, 2 completely different lives. Unfortunately, she had no other choice. She looked back again, turned her head and strode out. This game of chess was not finished because the players were not in the mood. Li Yi was a bit conflicted. He had never expressed any intention of helping Yang Liuqing. First, it was because what she wanted to do was too important and risky, and it required a great investment of money. If he helped her with all his strength, even he could not afford it. Second, it was because fundamentally speaking he was not helping Yang Liuqing but Yang Fu. Yang Liuqing was his martial nephew, his own martial nephew, who was Yang Fu. But now it was different. From a sociological point of view, Yang Fu was already a dead man. He could not appear in front of the people of the Wu Kingdom again. For the rest of his life he could only choose to be an ordinary person. And if he was not in a hurry, he did not need to use the red barbarian cannon to blast his way through. He could take the dog head of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom within 3 months and take the simple and violent route. In fact, the rebellion could be done slowly. He only needed to provide some strategic support and weapons support to help her mobilize the strength of the people of the Wu Kingdom, unite the front and advance step by step. To be honest, it had always been a regret in his heart that Emmingzi did not sit on the throne. However, since things had come to this, he could not possibly rebel against Li Xian. Now there was a great opportunity in front of him. If he missed it, it would be a pity. After all, if he missed this opportunity, he wouldn't get another one. Li looked at Mississippi Lu, thought for a moment and said, "This is her choice." Mississippi Lu stood up and walked back to her room. Li sighed. He knew that Rui was conflicted. On one hand she wanted to help her only disciple, but on the other hand she had to think about everyone else. She would no longer act on impulse or passion. He carried Shanning back to the room, walked out again and sat back in his original position. He pondered for a long time, but still couldn't make a decision. "What's wrong? Are your hands itching?" Li Xian walked in from outside and sat opposite him. He looked at him and asked with interest. Li glanced at him. "What do you mean itching my hands? Stop pretending." Li Xian looked at him and said, "I know. Your precious disciple nephew will be leaving tomorrow." Li needed to correct a mistake. Yang Liuqing was Mississippi Lu's precious disciple, and his disciple nephew. There was no need to add any attribution in front of the name, disciple nephew. He looked at Li Xian and said, "She has her mission. Do you think that everyone is like you, not doing a proper job and being muddle-headed and lazy in politics? Keep pretending. Li Xian crossed his arms and looked at him as if he had seen through everything. He said, I don't believe that you are not tempted by her. Li looked back. Rui and the others had entered the room, and Mississippi Lu was not outside. He then looked back at Li Xian with a slightly angry expression. Although we are very familiar with each other, don't talk nonsense. Do you think I don't know you? Li Xian waved his hand and said, don't think that I don't know. You wanted Mingzu to be the empress, but that incident happened and the plan failed. I know that you must have regrets in your heart. You want Mingzu to be the empress and you want your second daughter to be the empress. He looked at Li Yi and suddenly asked, tell me honestly, do you have any special fetish? Do you especially like empress, queen and princess, He Mingzu Shaning Yangliuking Yongning? You must have this fetish. Li Xian looked at him and continued, this time it was personally suggested by that old man. I don't believe that you will miss this rare opportunity. Slander, naked slander. The reason why he was conflicted was because he did not want his martial nephew, his own martial nephew, to die for nothing. He also did not want Mississippi Lu to fight for Zhong Tian or not. It might become a lifetime of regret in the future. Li Xian, that son of a bitch, what was in his head? Not to mention Mingzu Shaning is still a child. Yang Liuqing is his martial nephew. Yongning is his younger sister, despicable, shameless. Li Yi pointed at him and said angrily, get out of my sight right now. Don't, are you angry because of this? Li Xian shook his head and said, this is not a secret. We still have many spies in the Wu Kingdom. If you need them you can call them. Li Duan stood beside Li Yi, pulled his sleeve and asked, Father, where is senior sister going? If the Li family was compared to a sect, then Rui, and him should be the first generation, and now there were also Ruoqing and Zuamo. Yang Liuqing was Rui's disciple, and counted as the second generation. Li Duan and Li Mu, in the future there might be Li Xiao and Li Rong, and their other children were also the second generation. In this generation Yang Liuqing was the eldest. Li Yi patted Li Duan's head gently and said, senior sister is going back to her hometown. Li Duan was a little disappointed when he heard this. Senior sister was gone, and there was one less person to play with him. But even he wanted to go back to the capital and see Xiao Rui. Senior sister had been away from home for so long, and she must be very homesick. Old man Wang got into the carriage early. He was too ashamed to see anyone now, especially Li Xian. At his age he was caught on the spot criticizing others behind their backs, and then he suffered inhuman torture. This would be a stain that this old man could not wash away for the rest of his life. Wei Liang and Qin Qing stood behind Yang Liuqing, looking resolute. There was a kind of rustling wind and cold water, and a strong man who would never return. Yang Liuqing walked to Mississippi Lu, knelt down on both knees and respectfully bowed 3 times. He stood up and said, Master, I'm leaving. Take care of yourself in the future. Li Yi was half a step behind Mississippi Lu. He could clearly see her clenching and unclenching her fists. Yang Liuqing turned and left. After a few steps he suddenly stopped and walked to Li Yi's side. He said, Uncle, I have a few words to say to you in private. Li Yi was startled. He confirmed that she was talking to him and not Mississippi Lu. After glancing at Rui, he turned and walked into the room. Yang Liuqing slowly followed. She looked up at Li Yi and a smile appeared on her face. She said, after thinking about it carefully, there are some words that I still want to tell Uncle before I leave. I'm afraid that if I leave this time I won't have the chance to say it again. Li Yi's lips parted slightly, and a look of surprise appeared on his face. What's going on? He suddenly thought of a ridiculous possibility in his heart, but he quickly erased this thought. This was too ridiculous. At this moment Yang Liuqing had already begun to speak with a smile. Actually, Uncle has always been the person I admire the most in my heart. Li Yi secretly cursed in his heart. As expected, he had guessed correctly. Mississippi Lu was standing outside. If she wanted to listen she could totally hear what he said. However, she was about to leave. Before leaving, Li Yi did not want to hurt her heart anymore. How should he reject her tactfully so that he would not hurt her? Should he tell a white lie? But Rui's limpid eyes would not cut him with a sword out of kindness. Uncle is very smart. In my heart, you are the smartest person in the world. You have penetrating insight and you take every possibility into account. There is nothing that can baffle you. Li Yi blushed a little as he waved his hand and said, not at all. Actually, I am still a little far from what you have said. Yang Liuqing smiled and said, Uncle doesn't have to be humble. I have seen all the things that you have done all these years. He did not expect that she had secretly been paying attention to him for so long. Li Yi sighed and said, I understand your intentions but, Uncle is very smart but in some matters you are very stupid. Yang Liuqing looked at him and said, actually Master and Uncle are very similar. Both of them will not easily speak out their thoughts. However, Uncle is a man. There are some things that cannot wait for a woman to speak first. Ah? This turn was a little abrupt. Li Yi did not react in time. These words cannot be said to Master. I can only say it to Uncle. Yang Liuqing looked at him and said, from now on, I don't know when we can meet again. I don't know if we can meet again. Uncle, take care. She said this last sentence, turned around and walked out of the room. Li Yi looked at her back and sighed. He said slowly, you, stop right there. He rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Because of a certain problem he felt a slight headache. How to launch a successful rebellion in the ancient times. Waiting online. It's urgent. Chapter 1072. Yang Liuqing's footsteps paused, but she did not turn her head. You are going to die like this. Li Yi shook his head and said, isn't it just a rebellion? It's not a big deal. Uncle Master will help you. Yang Liuqing's body trembled slightly. All these years she had only shed tears twice when her father and brother had been killed, and when her mother had committed suicide, and when she had reunited with her master. She had brought Jianghu with her when they had been chased by the imperial court. She had not cried when they had been on the run. She had not cried when they had fought their way out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood when they had been defeated by the imperial court. But at this moment, because of Li Yi's words, she had instantly burst into tears. She wiped her tears and when she turned her head, her face was already smiling. She shook her head and said, Uncle Master, I appreciate your kindness, but these are my niece's family matters. Please do not interfere. Li Yi looked at her and asked, do you know what the first rule of our sect is? Yang Liuqing shook her head and said in a low voice, we do not have a sect and we do not have rules. Now we do. Li Yi looked at her and said, the first rule of our sect is to be obedient. Uncle Master. Li Yi gently patted her head as if he was patting Li Duan and said, be good, be obedient, Uncle Master. If you do not listen, you will be punished according to the sect rules. She looked at Li Yi's solemn expression, opened her mouth and did not say another word. However, the tears in her eyes that she had been holding back rolled down uncontrollably, sliding down her face. At first it was only one or two but then it became a string. She squatted on the ground and hugged her knees. Although she was still trying hard to hold back, she could not help but cry out. Li Yi was most afraid of girls crying. When Zumo cried, he could hug her and comfort her gently, but the person in front of him was his martial nephew. When Yang Liuqing cried, he didn't even know where to put his hands. Especially when Mississippi Lu heard the noise and walked into the room. She stood at the door and saw Yang Liuqing squatting on the floor, hugging his knees and crying. When she looked at him again, he didn't know what to do. Yang Liuqing cried for a while before she stopped. She stood up straight, her face slightly red. Li Yi thought of what she had just said and asked curiously, what did you say just now? What happened between your master and me? Mississippi Lu glared at him, then at Yang Liuqing and pulled her away. Li Yi was a little confused. He wasn't the one who had made her precious disciple cry. He couldn't help her but he couldn't help her either. He was in a bad spot. It was normal for girls to be sentimental. There was nothing shameful about crying, not to mention in front of him and Rui. Old man Wang would be greatly embarrassed. Because he didn't want to see anyone, he had long hidden in the carriage waiting to leave. But now that he was not in a hurry to leave, he had to get off the carriage and walk back under everyone's gaze. Even the servant girls of the Li family knew that the old man beside Miss Yang liked to talk behind people's backs. He was so old that he still pooped his pants. Old man Wang had replaced Yang Fu and become the man of the hour. As early as a few days ago, Yang Fu had been sent to the mountains. He would spend a very long time on one of the mountains in the land of chaos. Chen Qing had personally led people to the Wu kingdom to spread the news that the former emperor's legitimate son, King Jing, had been assassinated by Emperor Wu's men and died early. This just happened to confirm an old saying. Some people were alive but they were already dead. Rebellion had never been a simple thing. Rebellion also had to pay attention to basic laws and core values. Li Yi played it down when he said it, but when he really carried it out, he had to be very careful with every step he took. Fortunately, he had a lot of useful information to search for and countless historical experiences to learn from. He didn't even have to tailor it for them. There were thousands of ways to rebel, and there would always be one that suited them. Moreover, she wasn't rebelling. She was also the legitimate heir of the Wu kingdom. What she wanted to do was to set things right. In fact, compared to Mingzhu, it was even easier for her to ascend to the supreme position. Mingzhu's real identity was a princess, and she was the real princess royal of the Wu kingdom. She had a very high prestige among the people of the Wu kingdom. According to Old Man Wang, they also had some old subordinates of the former dynasty who were deeply hidden in the imperial court. Before the official rebellion, Li Yi naturally had to understand these things first. This time he didn't intend to use too much power. Wang Wei and the others would be enough to manage the fringe well. Other than a few experts, the Lu League didn't need to move into the Wu kingdom on a large scale. Their power was never the deciding factor, and they were also not Yang Liuqing's biggest reliance. Historical experience told him that the more ferocious the enemy was and the more difficult the environment was, the more it was necessary to mobilize the power of the people. Uncle Master. A figure came from behind and sat beside him. Yang Liuqing was silent for a moment. Then he said softly, "Uncle Master, I don't want to take revenge anymore." Li Yi turned to look at her. She thought for a moment and said, "Once we start the rebellion, many people will die, many innocent people." Li Yi knew that deep in her heart she still didn't want to be a burden to him and Rui. But in reality he didn't want to be a burden either. In the face of an army of tens of thousands, their strength was far from enough. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Even if you don't start the rebellion, will there be fewer people dying?" Yang Liuqing lowered her head and didn't say anything. The Wu kingdom was now divided by warlords. There were conflicts between the imperial court and the major forces, and between the major forces themselves. The ones who suffered in the middle were the millions of innocent people. As long as this chaos didn't end, the people would suffer one more day, and the number of people who died would increase. She shook her head and said, "I can't be a burden to Master and Uncle Master." Li Yi looked at her and said, "Your master and I can't help you clear away all the obstacles. You still have to rely on yourself." A smile involuntarily appeared on her face. Even if she only had 500 soldiers under her command, as long as she knew that her master and Uncle Master were behind her, she still had the confidence of a magnificent army. Yang Liuqing nodded and showed a hint of determination on her face. She said, "Thank you, Uncle Master. I definitely won't let Master and Uncle Master down." Li Yi looked at her and said, "It's up to you to rescue the people of the Wu kingdom from the abyss of suffering." Yang Liuqing thought for a moment and suddenly asked, "Uncle Master, can I ask you a question?" "Go ahead." Li Yi leaned back on the chair and put his hands behind his head as he said casually, "Uncle Master seems to really want us to rise up and rebel? Really? Ever since the day Prime Minister Wang came to find Uncle Master, I felt it. Before that, I knew Uncle Master didn't want me to take revenge. It must be a misconception." Li Yi saw that she was looking at him. He looked around and saw Shanning, who had one leg wrapped and was sitting on the swing with Yongning. He thought for a moment and said, "If Emperor Wu hadn't killed his father and usurped the throne, you wouldn't have escaped to Shuzhou. If you hadn't escaped to Shuzhou, he wouldn't have sent people to kill you. If he hadn't sent people to kill you, Shanning wouldn't have attacked that assassin. If Shanning didn't attack that assassin, she wouldn't have sprained her ankle." Yang Liuqing looked at him with a trace of doubt on her face. "So, if Emperor Wu hadn't killed his father and usurped the throne, Shanning wouldn't have sprained her ankle." Li Yi looked at Shanning, who was not far away, and explained, "She's my disciple. If I don't avenge her ankle, I won't be able to take it lying down." He then looked at Yang Liuqing and said, "So, you have to work hard to end the situation of the Wu kingdom's clique. Take back the country that the traitor stole from you. If Yang Fu can't help him, you can become the emperor yourself. Govern the Wu kingdom well and return peace to the people." Yang Liuqing still didn't understand why they wanted to rebel when Shanning sprained her ankle. The expression on his face became even more doubtful. "Forget it, these are not important." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "In short, you have to remember to take back your father's country and become the emperor yourself." Chapter 1073. From the bottom of his heart, Li Yi actually did not want to persuade someone to be an emperor. This was the minister appointed by the late emperor of Wu Kingdom to entrust the orphan to him. He was the former prime minister, Old Wang. Through the deeds of the eldest princess of the Jing Kingdom in charge of politics, and coincidentally, he met the emperor of the Jing Kingdom in Shuzhou, who looked the least like an emperor. After suffering a double blow both mentally and physically, He brainstormed for a while before coming up with this unprecedented idea that would shock the heavens and the earth and make the gods cry. Li Yi could swear to God that he had no part in this process. What was more coincidental was that it was Yang Liuqing who wanted to overthrow the tyranny of the Wu kingdom, establish a new regime, and liberate the poor people of the Wu kingdom. Who was Yang Liuqing? He was Mississippi Lu's disciple, the only disciple, and his blood relative. Who was Mississippi Lu? She was Lu Rui, his sister-in-law, the only sister-in-law, and his blood relative. He and Rui were of the same generation, so Yang Liuqing was his martial nephew, the only martial nephew, and his blood relative. Could he just watch as his own disciple sent himself to his death, and cause Rui to sink into pain and sorrow every time she thought of her disciple? Obviously not. Moreover, Shanning had sprained her ankle, and he had to take revenge. Li Yi decided to go back to his room and take out the proposal that he had been saving up for a while to refer to it. It was originally tailor-made for Mingzhu, but due to various reasons, it could only be put aside permanently. Li Yi had thought that he would never need it again in this life, but he did not expect that it could be put to use so soon. Although Mingzhu and Yang Liuqing had the same ultimate goal, they had different starting points, different circumstances, and completely different paths to take. One was a gentle replacement, while the other was a violent revolution. However, there were some similarities between them. It was a pity that Mingzhu did not come this time. Otherwise, she could have exchanged insights with Yang Liuqing. After all, she was his senior. Speaking of Mingzhu, he really missed her. He didn't know if she had gained weight or lost weight. He also didn't know if she drank soup often. He also didn't know if she missed him and his egg-fried rice. Li Yi sighed. In fact, he should go back to the capital to have a look. But Li Mu was only a few months old and couldn't stand the long journey. What's more, he had something important to do soon. After being idle for so long, his hands were really itching. The blood in his chest that had been cold for a long time seemed to have a tendency to heat up again. Which area should he start from? While Li Yi was deep in thought, a figure walked past him. He raised his head, thought for a moment, then waved his hand and said, "Su Zheng, come here for a moment." Li Xian was very regretful. He really wanted to see how Yang Liuqing would rebel. If possible, he even wanted to participate personally and fire the first shot of the revolutionary uprising. But they had stayed in Shuzhou for a few months. It had been more than half a year since he left the capital. There had never been an emperor like him. Many courtiers had already expressed strong dissatisfaction with this. There had also been a certain degree of instability in the capital. Moreover, he couldn't abandon his wife and children to wander outside. They were going back. Li Yi carried Shanning on his back and walked on the street. Her feet hadn't fully recovered, and it was inconvenient for her to walk with a cane. So during this period of time, Li Yi was her legs. Shuzhou should have become the largest commodity trading center in the Jing kingdom and even in the surrounding countries. In a small Yong county, they could buy the specialties of each country. They were going to leave tomorrow. Li Yi specially took her out to buy things today. Just the number of guards following behind to take the items was already more than 10. Bai Su followed by his side. She was Shanning's personal bodyguard. These days she was inseparable from her, so naturally she was inseparable from Li Yi. Luckily, the enmity and grudges between them had already vanished into thin air along with that piece of secret prescription. This young Miss Bai's attitude towards him was much better, and occasionally she would even smile at him, which made Li Yi feel overwhelmed by the favor. He even felt that Bai Su's previous sexual orientation was different from other women because she felt too inferior in some areas, so she had a rebellious mentality. Because her foundation was too weak, she could have obvious results in a short period of time. This directly caused her confidence to soar. Perhaps she could reverse this mentality. From the bottom of his heart, he still hoped that Bai Su could be a normal woman. It was good to be a woman. Shanning was a little quiet today. She lay on his back without saying a word. She was completely different from the past when she always had endless things to say. She didn't say a word, as if she had something on her mind. Whenever she was unhappy, Li Yi would always try his best to make her happy. However, today was different. She could stay here for another month or two in a self-harming way, but no more. A woman walked past them with a child. The child, who was about 4 or 5 years old, looked at the rows of sugar figurines on the street. He tugged at the woman's sleeve and asked, "Mother, what are these?" The woman looked back and said with a smile, "These are sugar figurines." The child looked at the sugar figurines in the shape of animals. His throat moved and he asked, "Can these sugar figurines be eaten?" The woman smiled and walked forward to ask the old man blowing the sugar figurines, "Old man, can these sugar figurines be eaten?" Seeing his mother walk to the stall, the child's face lit up with joy. His eyes seemed to be shining. When the old man saw that there was a customer, he immediately nodded and said, "Yes. Madam, how many do you want?" "It's only 2 copper coins each." The woman turned back and stroked the child's head. She said, "Did you hear that? Grandpa said it can be." With that said, she held the child's hand and disappeared into the vast crowd. Shaning, who was lying on Li Yi's back, finally laughed. "Ah, sir, did you see that? That child was almost crying when he left." She wrapped her arms around Li Yi's neck and said, "Sir, I want to eat sugar figurines." She still remembered that the day before her husband left 2 years ago, he had bought her a lot of sugar figurines. She had not eaten them since then. Later, the old man who sold sugar figurines in the capital passed away. This was the first time she had seen sugar figurines since then. When Li Yi walked over, the old man got up from his chair and asked, "Sir, do you want sugar figurines? Do you want to blow them or draw them? The blowing ones are 5 copper coins and the drawing ones are 2 copper coins." Li Yi thought for a moment and asked, "Can I blow one myself?" The sugar figurines that Shaning and the rest had eaten in the past were all drawn. This kind of sugar figurine was usually used to eat. It was more difficult to blow a sugar figurine, but the shape was 3-dimensional and more aesthetically pleasing. The old man smiled and said, "Sir, don't underestimate these little sugar figurines. Even the simplest shape is not something that ordinary people can blow. Without years or decades of practice, you can't blow it well." Li Yi smiled and did not say anything. Although his library did not have much of a presence, it had never dropped the ball at critical moments. To think that he knew about astronomy, geography, elliptic hyperbola, hybrid biosphere, satellites in the sky and submarines in the sea. How could a mere sugar figurine stump him? Although there was no book that taught him how to blow a sugar figurine, it was ultimately an art. Just like calligraphy and painting, they were different routes to the same goal. With the addition of body and breath control, how could a dignified expert on the heaven list not be able to do these? Under the old man's doubtful gaze, he washed his hands, took out a small piece of sugar paste, and skillfully pulled out a candy stick. At this moment, the old man's eyes were already filled with surprise. Shaning's eyes also lit up. As he blew, he pinched the sugar figurine with his hands. Soon, a simple figure appeared in his hands. The surprise in the old man's eyes had already turned into shock. The difficulty of blowing a person and blowing an animal were worlds apart. If he had not been immersed in this for decades, it would be impossible for him to be so proficient. Even if this young man had started practicing since he was in his mother's womb, it would still be impossible. This. He looked at the young man's rapidly changing hand gestures, and his body suddenly trembled. He suddenly looked at the girl on his back and cried out involuntarily, This is incredible, incredible." Although it was just a sugar figurine, from the sugar figurine's figure, hairstyle and slightly blurred eyebrows, it could be seen at a glance that the person he was blowing was the girl on his back. In addition to being shocked, the old man suddenly became vigilant. If the young people nowadays were all so powerful, his rice bowl would be ruined, sir. Shaning hugged Li Yi's neck tightly, her face full of a blissful smile. "Cough, be gentle, I can't breathe." Li Yi stuck the sugar figurine on a bamboo stick and handed it to her, saying, "This is for you." Bai Su looked at the happy and satisfied girl, and then looked at Li Yi. She finally understood why there were so many mistresses in the imperial residence. She did not know how many women he had tricked with this method. For a young girl like her who had not seen the world, this kind of trick was the most attractive. Even the chief that she admired the most was tricked by him using some unknown method. And Senior Rui was a grandmaster, and he could even trick a grandmaster. She must be more careful in the future. Beast? She looked at the beautiful girl on his back and the lifelike sugar figurine in her hands. She secretly spat in her heart, "If you have the ability, blow one for her too." Chapter 1074. After blowing a candy figure for Shaning, Li Yi noticed that Bai Su was looking at him strangely. It was as if she was looking at a beast. He thought to himself, even if her breasts become bigger in the future, she will still be as narrow-minded as before. It's just that I gave it to Shaning and not her. So he blew another candy figure for her. It was a big-breasted woman with the same beautiful meaning and blessing. When the old man who sold the candy figure found out that Li Yi was not in the same trade as the one who blew the candy figure, he was obviously in high spirits. He insisted that he did not take his money. It was only a few copper coins, so Li Yi did not insist. Shaning held the candy figure in her hand. She could not bear to eat it until they returned home. Bai Su could not bear to eat it either. She looked at the candy figure in her hand enviously. Li Yi placed Shanning on the bed in the room and asked, "What do you want to eat today? I will make it for you." She counted with her fingers and said, "I want to eat spicy prawns, steamed fish, braised pork ribs and Sir's soup." Tomorrow she and Li Xian would set off for the capital. Before that, Li Yi would fulfill all her requests. When Li Yi walked out of the room, Shanning sat on the bed for a while before jumping off. She put on her shoes and looked around the room. After a while, she found a brocade box and carefully placed the candy figure in it. Bai Su stood outside the door and looked at the candy figure in her hand for a long time. A trace of jealousy appeared on her face. She bit off the candy figure's breast. "I will be back," said Li Xian solemnly as he stood at the entrance of the prince's mansion. The Fringe was a good place, especially the secret base that Li Yi had built there. In the past, the place he wanted to stay the most was the Academy of Sciences. But now, the Academy of Sciences was second to him. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Where is Shanning?" Bai Su replied, "In the room." Li Xian sighed and said, "If only she could stay for a few more months." Li Yi looked at his legs and Li Xian felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine, and he shivered. Li Yi looked at him and shook his head. "You guys go first. Wait at the city gate. I will bring her there in a while." In the room, Shanning's foot was still wrapped in white gauze. When she saw Li Yi, she said in a low voice, "Sir." Li Yi walked to the bed and squatted with his back to her. He said, "They have gone first. I will carry you to the city gate." "Wait a minute, I still have something to bring." Knowing that Mr. would carry her to the city gate, Xu Ning seemed a little happy. She hurriedly jumped off the bed, ran to the cabinet barefooted and took out a small box. "Wait a moment, I still have something to bring." Knowing that her teacher would carry her to the city gate, Shanning was clearly happy. She quickly jumped off the bed and ran barefoot to the side of the cupboard. She took out a small box. Li Yi pretended not to see it and she pretended not to see it. Li Yi pretended not to see it. Holding the box, she ran over, put on her shoes and lay on his back. The sloppy old man glanced at her. "Little girl, you don't have eyes." Bai Su lowered her head and didn't say anything. She and Jianghu of Silla could still bicker and glare at each other, but she didn't dare to get angry at the old man in front of her. Because Jianghu of Silla couldn't beat her, and even 10 of her couldn't beat this old man. Shanning's personality was lively. In the past, she would always be like a little bird chirping around him. Now that she had grown up, she always spoke softly, but she still had endless things to say. She couldn't wait to tell her all the interesting things that happened in the capital after Li Yi left the capital. For example, Li Han, who all the civil and military officials wanted to have a good relationship with, was always despised by a little girl, Duanwu. He even used his position as the dean and threatened not to graduate to force a student from the Mathematics Institute to pass on information for him. It was all because the student's sister was Duanwu's good friend. There was also a certain important official in the court who couldn't stand his fierce wife at home. He went to the women's union to report that his fierce wife often used violence against him. She and Li Yi had been talking about such interesting things for a few months, but there was no end to it. No matter how long the road was, there would always be an end. Li Yi didn't know how many streets and alleys he had gone through, but at some point he arrived at the city gate. "Teacher," Shanning suddenly said. "Yes." Li Yi habitually tilted his head slightly so that he could hear more clearly. The young girl's soft lips pressed against the side of his face. Shanning jumped down from his back and waved at him. Her pretty face was full of smiles. "Goodbye, teacher." She ran into the city gate and looked back every 3 steps. Li Yi personally sent the caravan of nearly 100 people out of the city. The girl who had been waving at him for a long time on the carriage at the very front had already disappeared. He stood in place and watched for a long time until he could not even see the last shadow of the figure. Yongning stood beside him and held his hand. She asked, "Brother, when will Royal Sister come to see us again?" Li Yi thought for a while and said, "Maybe next year." Yongning smiled and said, "Next year I'll be 10 years old next year. Royal Sister said that when I turn 10 she'll give me a big present." Li Yi held her hand and walked into the city gate. When they walked into the city, Li Yi looked at the hot sun above his head and said, "Cindy, go back and pack your things. Tomorrow we'll be moving to the mountains. Okay? The young girl seemed very happy. Her voice was clear. Fang said that next time he'll bring me and Dwayner to the mountains to hunt rabbits. Wu Kingdom, imperial capital, inside the palace walls. The hot sun roasted the ground and waves of heat hit. A eunuch ran through the palace gate. When he ran to a certain hall, he was already drenched in sweat. He didn't have time to wipe the sweat off his face or tidy up his clothes. He walked to the door of the hall and pushed it open. He stood respectfully in the hall and said, "Your Majesty, urgent report from Jianghu." In the hall, other than the young man sitting at the top, there were a few other people. A man in green cupped his fists and said, "Your Majesty, in the past 3 months, 3 more provinces in the northwest have rebelled. However, they aren't very strong. General Qing has already led the army to suppress them. We should be able to receive good news soon." The young man nodded and looked at the eunuch. He asked, "What's the matter?" The eunuch knelt on the ground and said, "Your Majesty, urgent report from Jianghu. Said that His Highness King Jing was assassinated a month ago. He has died." The young man clenched and relaxed his fists. He asked with a sullen face, "What did you say? King Jing was assassinated?" "It's news from Jianghu. Everyone in Jianghu knows about King Jing's death. Investigate." The young man's face was as dark as water. He said coldly, "Investigate this thoroughly. Arrest the villain who assassinated King Jing. I want to execute his 9 generations. 10 generations. Pringyong, I'll leave this matter to you. Don't come back to see me if you don't catch him." "Yes." The general in green immediately cupped his fists and slowly retreated. When only the young man was left in the hall, he slowly sat down and a smile appeared on his face. He turned around and a withered hand clutched his neck. Granduncle." He was lifted up by the neck. His face was red and he said with difficulty, "You." Opposite him, an old man looked at him with bloodshot eyes. He gritted his teeth and said, "B*****. Do you still have any humanity?" His hand tightened slightly, and the young man's face became even redder. After an unknown amount of time, he released his hand and suddenly flung it. The young man fell to the ground, clutching his neck and gasping for breath. The old man looked at him and did not hide the murderous intent in his eyes. He said gloomily, "If you hadn't massacred all the members of the Yang imperial family, and only the 2 of us are left, I would have sent you to see your father today." The young man clutched his neck and suddenly laughed. He said, "So what if I massacred them? Isn't there still granduncle? If you kill me you can become the emperor yourself. You're just afraid that you're too old to have a son and leave the Yang imperial family without a successor." The old man kicked him, and the young man's body moved several feet horizontally in the hall. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, but his face was full of a crazy smile. "Lunatic, you lunatic." The old man looked at him and said angrily, "Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? Of course you don't dare." The young man supported himself against a pillar and slowly stood up. He asked mockingly, "Other than you and me, there are no males in the Yang imperial family. If you kill me, who will become the emperor, my poor sister?" Chapter 1075. Greetings, elder ancestor. 2 eunuchs stood at the entrance of the hall. When they saw a figure in gray walking out, they immediately knelt on the ground. The old man did not even look at the 2 eunuchs and quickly left. The 2 eunuchs looked at each other and saw fear in each other's eyes. How could they not have heard the commotion in the hall just now? However, among the 2 people in the hall, one was the current emperor, and the other was the most revered elder ancestor of the royal family. A battle of this level was far from what they could participate in. When the elder ancestor was young, he was the most famous prince in the Wu kingdom. He had once personally led an army and won a war that almost overturned the Wu kingdom. After that, he quickly quelled a few rebellions in the country and captured countless people's hearts. However, just when he had won the hearts of the people and the court officials, and was only 1 step away from ascending to the throne, he inexplicably went to pursue some illusory martial path and left the imperial capital. There was no news of him for 20 years. At that time the emperor was already beyond cure. Before he passed away, he searched everywhere for the elder ancestor, but to no avail. In desperation, he could only pass the throne to his younger brother. More than 10 years later, a prince who held great power forced the emperor to abdicate and rebel. His army had already fought their way to the outskirts of the imperial capital. He was only 1 step away from making the emperor pass the throne. However, on the last day of the 3-day limit that the prince set for the court officials and the royal family, his own head was hung on the palace wall. In one night, more than 10 generals who had participated in the rebellion were all killed, and their heads were separated from their bodies. The elder ancestor had quelled the rebellion single-handedly. From then on, he had become a legend in the hearts of the people of the Wu kingdom and the court officials. He was also the greatest glory of the royal family. It was said that he had already climbed to the peak of martial path. His martial arts cultivation was superb, and it was difficult to find a match in the world. In the royal family, he had the highest seniority, the most respected position, and the greatest influence. Even the emperors of the past dynasties had to be respectful to him. It was a pity that there were not many people left in the royal family of the Wu kingdom now. After His Majesty ascended to the throne, blood flowed like a river in the capital. Those who were uprooted were not only the ministers who accused him of plotting to usurp the throne, but also all the men of the royal family. They were all killed by him for various reasons. Every time they thought of this matter, they would feel a chill down their spines. The door to the hall was slowly pushed open. The young man wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and brushed off the footprints on his chest. He held his chest and walked out with great difficulty. The expressions of the two eunuchs changed, and they immediately went forward. Your Majesty, what's wrong? Imperial physician, quickly summon the imperial physician. The young man waved his hand and said, let the head of the internal guards come and see me. Yes. The eunuch responded and left quickly. The internal guards belonged to the emperor alone. Other than being responsible for the safety of the imperial city, they also controlled the matters of the imperial capital and even the entire Wu kingdom. They were a sharp sword hanging over the heads of all high officials and nobles. The young man walked back into the hall and slowly walked to the top and sat down. He clenched his fists tightly, and his face was as gloomy as water. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and muttered, Grandmaster. Imperial uncle, I am the emperor of the Wu kingdom. You are old, very old, so old that you can die. Not long after, an old eunuch pushed open the door and walked to the young man's side. He bowed and said, Your Majesty, what are your orders? The young man looked at him, narrowed his eyes and asked, Is Jianghu really dead? The eunuch said in a hoarse voice, Your Majesty, although no one has come to claim the reward, the news of King Jing's death has already spread to several prefectures, including Jianghu. In a few days the entire Wu kingdom will know about it. At that time, even if he is not dead, there is no difference from being dead. He cupped his hands respectfully. Congratulations, Your Majesty. With King Jing's death, no one will be able to pose any threat to Your Majesty. The young man pondered for a moment and said slowly, If he is alive, I want to see him. If he is dead, I want to see his corpse. Think of a way to contact those spies. Yes, Your Majesty, the eunuch answered. The young man looked at the eunuch and asked, You are only one step away from becoming a grandmaster, so you must know a lot about martial arts. Grandmasters can never be defeated, right? The eunuch shook his head and said, Grandmasters are not immortals. No matter how good their martial arts are, they are only one person. They can't fight against thousands of troops and horses. If thousands of troops and horses can be used, do I need to ask you? The eunuch shivered and immediately said, Apart from that, only a grandmaster can defeat a grandmaster. Hidden weapons and poisons are just insignificant tricks to them. The young man clenched his fists and said in a deep voice, Help me recruit a grandmaster at all costs. The eunuch was stunned and said, Your Majesty, most grandmasters are indifferent. They come and go without a trace. The young man looked at him and asked, You mean you can't do this? The old eunuch trembled. He cupped his fists and said, Please rest assured, Your Majesty. The young man returned to his seat and looked at the empty hall. He murmured, The Wu kingdom only needs an emperor. It doesn't need an ancestor. The fringe had long been built into a stable base by Li Yi. After clearing out the bandits, the first thing he needed to do was to roll up his sleeves and work hard to focus on the construction. Up until now, the several mountains around the stockade village had all been renovated. There was a slide down the mountain, and the road up the mountain was also made of cement. After the dozens of mountains in the vicinity were surrounded, a city was formed. It was called the city of Rui. At first, Li Yi wanted to name the city after himself. Unfortunately, his name was not as nice as Rui's. The title of Wulin Chancellor and King of Bandits was Rui, not him. He had no choice but to give up. The headquarters of the Lu League had long been moved to the city of Rui. They occupied a mountain alone. After mixing up the bandits they had subdued, there were more than 20,000 of them. These people were in charge of the defense of the entire fringe. They were in charge of the defense of the entire land of chaos. With the cooperation of a few thousand people in the land of chaos, which was easy to defend but hard to attack, with the advantage of the terrain and sharp weapons, even the army of the Wu kingdom would not be able to break in. Of course, these were the forces of the city of Rui. Li Yi did not intend to use these people to help Yang Liuqing attack the city. they would not be of much use outside. Every summer, when the weather was the hottest, it was a good choice to come to Rui to escape the heat. Rui had nothing to do, so she taught a few disciples. Drunk Ink had been idle for a long time, so she could not help but start designing clothes. Of course, this included brassiere. This time, Li Yi had a reason to openly admire and help her come up with strategies. Ruoqing was actually the busiest. Although she had put aside the matters of the brothel, she had an even more important mission. In the near future, there were countless people in the Wu Kingdom who were in dire straits waiting to bathe in the radiance of the Empress. In the far future, there were hundreds of thousands of lost believers in the Qi Kingdom who were waiting for her to guide them. One advised people to be kind and charitable, while the other advised people to be evil and rebel. It was clear which concubine was real and which one was fake. Yang Liuqing stayed here for the time being because Li Yi's Empress plan had not been completed. He had to stay here to accompany his wife and child. He could only write down the things she wanted to do in detail on a piece of paper. Of course, he could not be bookish. He would not limit their actions to such a small book. From the Zhangzhou of the Wu Kingdom to here, there was an extremely smooth road. The speed of information transmission was extremely fast. It could be reached in a day and new strategies could be formulated at any time. Li Yi wrote a part of the plan and walked out to take a breath of fresh air. He saw Su leaning against a big tree, with a chicken drumstick in one hand and wine in the other. He took a bite of the chicken and drank a mouthful of wine. He still looked so sloppy, but there was a faint sense of elegance. He had the temperament of a qigong. This was the demeanor of a different grandmaster. Especially when paired with the melancholy and hesitation that appeared in his eyes, Li Yi could almost be sure that this was an old man with a story. The imperial palace of the Wu Kingdom. The emperor of the Wu Kingdom looked at an old woman in the hall and slowly said, "As long as you help me with this matter, I will agree to any of your requests." The old woman had a head of white hair, but there were not many wrinkles on her face. Her body was not stooped at all. She looked at the young man in front of her, her expression as calm as an ancient well. "You are the emperor?" The young man was startled, then smiled and said, "Besides the emperor, who else dares to call himself emperor? I can agree to your request." The old woman looked at him and said, "But before that, you must help me find someone." Oh. The old woman narrowed her eyes. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes deepened. She slowly opened her mouth and her voice was cold, making people feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. "Sutian." Chapter 1076. Cough cough. When Li Yi saw that Su picked up the wine pot and gulped it down, he knew that he might have choked because he had eaten too much chicken. The one who loved to eat chicken was second granduncle. In order to satisfy his craving for good food, there were 5 cooks in the family who specially made chicken for him. There were a variety of methods, including dozens of methods and over a dozen cuisines. Occasionally they would even create new methods. Su didn't like to eat chicken in the past. He loved white rabbit creamy candies. However, he couldn't stand eating too much sugar when he was old, so he started to imitate second great uncle. Li Yi knew that Su was actually from the Wu Kingdom. For most masters, those mundane things could no longer pique their interest. They pursued higher martial arts. Most of them would choose to travel around in search of opportunities to break through again. Of course, Su's opportunities were not outside but here. Li Yi walked over and sat opposite him. He asked, "White Rabbit Creamy Candies have released a new type of milk candy with low sugar content. It won't spoil your teeth. So do you want to try it?" The sloppy old man didn't even raise his head. He said, "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" It was great to talk to such a straightforward person. He was straightforward and didn't beat around the bush. Li Yi thought about it and said, "Su is also from the Wu Kingdom. I don't think you want to see the people of the Wu Kingdom suffer from war and live in misery. I'm not going." The sloppy old man wiped his mouth and said even more straightforwardly. Li Yi was stunned. "I haven't said what it is. You want me to protect that little girl?" The sloppy old man looked at him and said, "I'm not going to the Wu Kingdom." It wasn't good to talk to such a straightforward person at all. The sloppy old man stood up and said, "With your second young mistress and the experts on the heaven list, even a master won't be able to do anything. Moreover, the only master left in the Wu Kingdom is Yang Wanli. He's also a member of the Yang royal family. He won't do anything to that little girl." Li Yi originally thought that there was nothing to worry about in the fringe with Rui and second great uncle by his side. There were also many guards outside. Yang Liuqing's trip back to the Wu Kingdom was fraught with danger. With a master by his side, he didn't have to worry too much about his safety. However, since Elder Su said so, he did not insist. After all, Elder Su was a guest, not a servant of the Li family. He thought for a while and asked curiously, could it be that the Wu kingdom only has two grandmasters, Elders Su and Yang Wanli? 2. The sloppy old man waved his hand and said, 3, isn't there another one here? That's even more impossible. Anyway, don't worry, there aren't that many idle grandmasters in the Wu nation. The sloppy old man seemed to be very unwilling to talk about this topic. After saying that, his figure quickly disappeared. Li looked at the old man's back and shook his head. Perhaps he was really thinking too much. At first glance, Rui's second great-uncle, Su Chang, the Taoist priest with the surname Yuan, and the Taoist nun in the Qi kingdom were all masters. It seemed like masters were everywhere. But when he thought about it carefully, he didn't seem to have heard of any other masters besides them. He stretched his body and walked back to his room to finish writing the unfinished plan. Yang Liuqing knocked on the door and walked in. "Uncle, you were looking for me?" Li nodded and took out a book from the drawer. He handed it to her and said, "Keep this. It will be of great use in the future." Yang Liuqing took it and looked at it. She was stunned and looked at him. "Uncle, this..." Li pointed at the book Rebellion, What You Need to Know, and said, "This book is a general program and also a basic introduction. You can read it after you go down and see if you can understand it. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask me. As for the next step of the plan, you can modify it according to the actual situation." Sorry, I took the wrong book." He saw the cover of the book and was stunned. He immediately took back the book Queen Training Plan from Yang Liuqing and put it back into the drawer. He handed the book Rebellion, What You Need to Know to her and said, "This is the book. Read it carefully these few days. I still have something to do, so I'll leave first." When he reached the door, he paused and said, "From now on, you have to be extremely careful with every step you take. It's time to get rid of those spies among your people." Other than the 2 guards by Yang Fu's side, Li Yi believed that there were still many spies planted by the martial emperor's side. The existence of these people would always be a threat, and as for how to identify and deal with them, he believed that they had their own methods. Both Wei Liang and Qin Qin came from the military, and each of them had a group of absolutely loyal personal guards who had gone through fire and water with them. It was impossible for them to be disloyal. First, these people were eliminated. There were still a few dozen of them left in the fringe. They were all left in a mountain. They did not have to worry about food and clothing here, but it was impossible for them to send any news out. Whether there were spies among them or not, it wouldn't matter anymore after a few years. After this round of cleansing, they had less than 500 soldiers. Including the first batch of people arranged by Lu Meng, they only had a little more than 600. However, their combat strength couldn't be simply measured by the number of people they had. Not to mention that some of them were experts who could fight against 10 or even dozens of experts. Even with Divine Punishment's excellent equipment, it was enough to easily deal with the elite troops of the Wu Kingdom. Of course, they had only a few people they could use to begin with. If they wanted to turn the situation around with such a small number of people, only fools would go head-on against the army of the Wu Kingdom. Yang Liuqing and the others probably still needed some time to prepare. When the first step of the plan was formulated, they would walk out of the fringe and take the first step of the revolution. Originally, he wanted to discuss with Drunken Mo about a few trendy underwear styles, but Old Man Wang came looking for him. They could only slowly talk about the underwear at night. Li admired Old Man Wang very much. He was avant-garde and bold. Although he was old, he wasn't pedantic at all. This was very rare in the current era. Moreover, in the future revolution, as the former prime minister and the role model of the literati of the Wu Kingdom, Old Man Wang would play a very big role. Rui and Yang Liuqing were both martial artists. It was very easy for them to carry a knife and kill people. However, if they were to talk about unifying their thinking, the united front, how to fight the land war well, how to establish and govern a base after a great victory, not only would they have a headache, but Li Yi himself would also have a headache. Professional things should be done by professionals. These days, after Jianghu of Sila's explanation, I'm suddenly enlightened. After Old Man Wang walked in, he first bowed to Li Yi. In fact, it was more than a sudden enlightenment. After talking with Li Yi for the past few days, he finally understood that there was so much to learn about rebelling. Many aspects of it were similar to governing a country through different means. He had long heard that Jianghu of Silla was the best in the world and was also a famous minister in the Jing kingdom in the past. He always thought that the rumors were exaggerated. Today, after experiencing it personally, he understood that those rumors were actually not true. You're welcome. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Prime Minister Wang, is there a problem today? Old man Wang nodded and said, Jianghu of Silla should also know that the traitor who usurped the throne was insane. After killing his brother and father, he was still worried that there would be others who would threaten his throne, so he slaughtered the Yang clan with groundless charges. Li Yi nodded. He had also heard of what Emperor Wu had done. This was not only insane, it was practically antisocial and anti-human. No one would do such a thing. In this way, other than that traitor, there are no more males in the Yang clan. After Her Royal Highness ascends the throne, that traitor will definitely not be able to escape death. A trace of worry appeared on Old Man Wang's face and he said, But after Her Royal Highness, who should this vast world be handed over to? Li Yi understood Old Man Wang's worry very well. For example, the Jing kingdom belonged to the Li family. It was fine for Li Xian or Li Han to sit, but Li Yi himself could not sit. Emperor Wu had killed all the males in the Yang clan. In the future, Empress Yang Liuqing would be bored, so she could not casually choose someone with the surname Yang to pass the throne to. Actually, what Old Man Wang said was wrong. Didn't the Yang clan still have Yang Fu? Forget it, Old Man Wang already thought he was dead. He respected the dead, so he would not mention it. However, on this matter the Empress in the other world had already given an answer. Li Yi looked at Old Man Wang and said, What's so difficult about this? When your princess has children in the future, just pass it to her son. What flows in his body is still half Yang clan's blood, no? This was a very easy problem to solve. Let Yang Liuqing's son have the surname Yang, and then inherit the throne. Old Man Wang's thoughts were still limited, but it was already not easy for him to think of the Empress. This couldn't be circumvented, and Li Yi could understand. Although Yang Liuqing's child in terms of bloodline could not be compared to the orthodox Yang clan's royal family, if she became the Empress, this wouldn't be a problem. In the other world, there was still someone who wanted to pass the throne to his nephew. Old Man Wang came to a sudden realization and clasped his hands, saying, Thank you, Jianghu of Silla, for dispelling my doubts. I thank you on behalf of the people of the Wu kingdom. You're welcome. Li Yi waved his hands again. The child born by Yang Liuqing would inherit the Wu kingdom, so what was there to thank him for? He couldn't help her give birth to a son. Chapter 1077. Although Li Yi was her martial uncle, as a martial uncle he could help Yang Liuqing rebel, but he couldn't help her give birth to a son. He only cared about how Yang Liuqing would ascend the throne, avenge her father and brother, and realize his long-cherished wish. As for who she would pass the throne to after she became the Empress, it was not something he, as a martial uncle, needed to worry about. Old Man Wang came with doubts and confusion. After Li Yi's guidance, he left with a happy face. After a while, Wei Liang and Qin Qing came again. For this martial nephew, Li Yi really worried a lot. Not only did he have to help her make a plan, but he also had to help her subordinates improve their ideological level. Wei Liang and Qin Qing were both former border generals, but guarding the border was different from rebelling. Li Yi needed to teach them how to start the first war, how to improve the military system, including how to expand the organization, how to do a good job in the United Front, and how to create a wave. Li Yi had always advocated that special people be used for special purposes, and the ideological work was handed over to Old Man Wang. He was very reassured. How to make nursery rhymes, how to stuff silk into a fish's stomach, how to write persuasion forms, he was definitely a professional. And Wei Liang and Qin Qing, their responsibilities were actually more important. How to develop their camp from 500 people to 50,000 people, how to fight every battle, how to defend every city, how to help the Empress clear all the obstacles along the way, such a heavy burden would be on their shoulders. Unknowingly they had talked for more than 2 hours. Li Yi waved his hand tiredly and said, Let's stop here for today. When the two left, they bowed deeply to him. These days what they learned from Jianghu of Silla was enough to use for a lifetime. Li Yi leaned against the back of the chair, closed his eyes and rested for a while. Although he was a little tired, it was worth it. Not to mention that he did all this to help his martial nephew, but also to satisfy some kind of complex in his heart. Moreover, Rui had become much gentler to him these days. It was all worth it. He leaned against the chair. After an unknown amount of time, a pair of hands appeared on his shoulders and began to gently press down. It was not Rui, Xiaohuan or Ruoqing or any of them, only Rui would use such a jerky technique. He was in a dilemma. On one hand he hoped that Rui would continue to be gentle, but on the other hand he hoped that she would return to her original self. She was becoming less and less like herself. If she deliberately suppressed it, would she be unhappy? Of course, it was only out of concern for Rui, and not because he had some weird fetish or awakened some attribute that he shouldn't have awakened. At some point, Rui's hand on his shoulder paused and said, "Thank you." "Thank me for what?" Li opened his eyes and asked in confusion. "Thank you for being willing to help her." "I'm helping her, why are you thanking me?" Mississippi Lu did not answer. Li thought about it and waved his hand. He said, "Actually, it's not as complicated as you think. Think about it, if your disciple becomes the Empress, you will be the Empress's teacher, and I will be the Empress's martial uncle. My seniority will be higher than the Empress's, and it will be so prestigious." Mississippi Lu paused and asked, "You're doing this for this? What else could it be?" Li shook his head and said, "Besides, if she becomes the Empress, you will be the Empress's teacher. At that time, even if Emingzu really becomes the Empress, won't you still be better than her?" Mississippi Lu frowned and said, "Even without this matter, I will still be better than her." There was no need for a family to be so calculative. Li naturally would not mention that she had lost to Mingzhu in a duel. He shook his head and said, "Aren't I just adding flowers to brocade?" Mississippi Lu seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Since you helped Yang Liuqing to ascend the throne because you want to be the Empress's martial uncle, then what did you want to do when you made Emingzu the Empress?" Li closed his eyes and said, "I've been talking to them for too long. I'm a little sleepy. I'm going to sleep for a while." He was actually really sleepy, but the hands on his shoulders were getting stronger and stronger, making it hard for him to fall asleep. Tsang Province. Tsang Province was located at the northwest border of the Wu Kingdom. Although it was not considered a barren land, it was too far away from the imperial capital and bordered the fringe. From time to time, bandits would come out of the mountains to wreak havoc. For hundreds of years, the people of Tsang Province had been plagued by bandits. In the past 2 years, the bandits in the fringe had been eliminated, but the lives of the people had become even more difficult. Ever since the Wu Kingdom fell into chaos a few years ago, the imperial court had lost control of Tsang Province. In the past few years, Tsang Province had changed hands several times. First, a tyrant took advantage of the chaos in the country and attacked the provincial capital. He killed the provincial governor and his assistant officials and proclaimed himself king. Of course, they were annihilated by the imperial court a few months later. After that, Tsang Province was attacked by several other tyrant forces. The imperial court retreated and retreated. 2 years ago, Princess Duanrong used her iron fist to wipe out the rebellious forces in Tsang Province. She promulgated several policies to benefit the people, allowing the people of Tsang Province to have a short period of time to recuperate. Unfortunately, good times did not last long. Just a year ago, Princess Duanrong was besieged by the imperial court and several enlistment forces. After the defeat, there was no news of her. On the surface, Tsang Province had been reclaimed by the imperial court. However, with the imperial court's military strength, they were unable to suppress the rebellious forces that took advantage of the situation in the past year. The people suffered from the rebellious forces and their lives were extremely difficult. In a village several dozen miles away from Tsang Province's capital, a white-haired village chief was kneeling on the ground, tears streaming down his aged face. He pleaded, "Lord Steward, please give us a little more time. Please give us a few more days. 2 days ago, the village was robbed and we only have this little bit of food left. If you take this food away, we won't be able to survive." A middle-aged man dressed in a satin robe glanced at him and said coldly, "It's only right and proper to pay a debt. What does it have to do with me that you were robbed? I only know that if you can't pay the rent that you are supposed to pay, the master will punish me when I return. If I give you a little more time, who will give me a little more time?" He looked at the people behind him and said, "What are you waiting for? Take all the food away." The servants carried the sacks on their backs. Among the crowd below, more than 10 men dressed in coarse clothes had grief and indignation on their faces. However, they could only stand where they were, not daring to make any sudden movements. If they made a move on these people, the ones who would come knocking on their door tomorrow would be the constables of the government. Watching as the people carried the food onto the horse carriage, the middle-aged man looked down and frowned. "You've only paid less than 30% of the rent. I'll give you half a month's time. If you still can't pay after half a month, don't blame me for being impolite." Half a month. The village chief watched as the people carried the last of the village's food away. He collapsed on the ground with lifeless eyes and muttered, "Half a month, half a month. Half a month, everyone will starve to death." He sat on the ground and pointed at the sky as he cursed, damned heaven, you're not giving us a way out. You're sending us to our deaths." None of the villagers spoke. Their eyes were empty as they stared blankly in front of them. The autumn harvest had just ended, and all the food had been robbed by the bandits. Unable to pay the rent, the master had plundered all their food. There were nearly 100 mouths in this village, and they were about to run out of food. How could they survive until the next year? This King world doesn't give us a way out at all. How good would it be if Her Royal Highness was still here? Xiaoyun. The woman's panicked voice woke everyone up and they all looked in the direction of the voice. A 7 or 8-year-old girl with messy hair and ragged clothes was lying on the ground. The woman crouched on the ground and picked up the girl, shaking her in panic. "Xiaoyun, what's wrong with you?" The village chief crawled up from the ground and quickly walked over. He touched the girl's forehead and shook his head. "This child has been sick for a few days. Hurry up and find a doctor. If we delay any longer, she'll die." The woman's face was filled with despair. They couldn't even eat, so where would they find the money to find a doctor? She hugged the girl and cried, Xiaoyun, I'm so sorry. Sister-in-law, what happened?" The woman raised her head when she heard the voice beside her. She saw a young man walking over from the side of the road. The young man walked to the woman's side and crouched down. He pinched the little girl's philtrum and she slowly regained consciousness. She looked at the woman and weakly said, "Mother, I'm hungry." The woman hurriedly wiped her tears and said, "Mother will go find something for you to eat." The young man took out a package from his bosom. After opening it, he took out a steamed bun and handed it to the little girl. "Eat something first." The little girl was startled. The next moment she took the steamed bun and wolfed it down. The young man turned back and said to the man with a red cross armband standing on the side of the road, "This little girl is sick. Come and take a look at her." He looked at the woman and smiled. "Don't worry, he's a doctor." All of this happened very quickly. The woman was stunned for a moment before she immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the young man a few times. She loudly said, "Thank you for your great kindness, thank you for your great kindness." The young man shook his head and smiled. "There's no need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank the Heavenly Empress." Chapter 1078. The situation in Sangzhou had always been tense. Normally, when strangers passed by the village, if they stayed in the village for too long, they would be questioned. They had to be careful because there were too many precedents. If they were careless, it could lead to the destruction of the entire village. However, the people that appeared in the Dong family village today were not on guard. They were not people from the government, nor were they bandits that went down the mountain. Whether it was the government or bandits, they would not give the villagers free medical treatment, free medicine, or give their food to the villagers to eat. If these people were bad people, then they would want to meet bad people like them every day. The young man handed a few doses of medicine to the woman and said, "Sister-in-law, this child only has a slight cold. Remember to boil 3 bowls of water into 1 bowl when you boil the medicine. You will be fine after drinking these medicines. We'll come back in 2 days." Thank you, benefactor, for saving our child." When the woman reached out to take the medicine, her eyes were filled with tears. She wanted to kneel down again, but the young man quickly helped her up. A man held his hand and firmly said, "Benefactor's great kindness is something we cannot repay. As long as there is anything we can do, just say the word. I, Dong Dahai, will climb a mountain of swords or descend into a sea of flames without a frown." The young man smiled and shook his head. "We are under the orders of the Empress of Heaven to relieve the suffering of the common people. This is a good deed. If we ask for something in return, wouldn't it damage the Empress of Heaven's merit?" The man was stunned and asked, "May I ask, benefactor, the Empress of Heaven that benefactor spoke of?" A trace of respect appeared on the young man's face. He said, "The Empress of Heaven is the embodiment of kindness and benevolence. We have received the teachings of the Empress of Heaven to punish the strong and eliminate evil, to help the people of the world, to eliminate injustice, and to accumulate good fortune for the Empress of Heaven. Many thanks to the Empress of Heaven, many thanks to the Empress of Heaven." After the man heard this, he pulled the woman beside him to kneel down and respectfully kowtowed several times in a certain direction. After they stood up, the young man looked at him and asked, "I heard that there is a group of fierce bandits nearby. They rape and pillage and do all kinds of evil. We are under the orders of the Empress of Heaven to eliminate them. I wonder if you know where this one-eyed tiger bandit is now?" One-eyed tiger. When the man named Dong Dahai heard this name, he clenched his teeth and a look of hatred appeared on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, "A few days ago, it was them who rushed into the village and stole our food." The young man looked at him and asked, "So, you know where those people are?" "I know, of course I know." The man nodded, then shook his head. He looked at him and said anxiously, "Benefactor, you can't do this. One-Eyed Tiger has dozens of brothers under him, and each of them has extraordinary skills. Even the government can't do anything to them. If you go, you'll just be throwing your lives away." The young man didn't mind at all and said, "It's fine. You just need to tell me where the One-Eyed Tiger is." The man's expression changed for a while. A moment later, a trace of viciousness appeared in his eyes as he said, "Benefactor, you saved my family Xiao Yun's life. If we don't have food, our family will starve to death." His gaze gradually became resolute as he said, "If you're going to find the One-Eyed Tiger, please bring me along." "Me too. Count me in. I'm going to die either way. Even if I die to the mountain patrol tiger, it's better than starving to death. At least I can drag someone down with me before I die." More than 10 men rushed in from outside. They were all excited and stood behind Dong Dahai. There was not a single bit of food left in the village. After today, even if they were not killed by the bandits, they would slowly starve to death. Therefore, it was better to follow these people and fight for a chance of survival. In this world, one's life was determined by one's own effort. The young man looked at them and said, "Think about it carefully. If you go, there's a chance that you won't be able to return." The man standing in front of the group shook his head and said with a pitiful smile, "It's still better than starving to death." The village chief of the Dong family walked up to them unsteadily and said, "Even if Benefactor doesn't come, we'll still fight it out with them. Only by doing so will we have a chance of survival. If we don't, the whole village will die together." The young man pondered for a moment and did not refuse. He nodded and said, "Then let's go together." Over 10 strong young men of the Dong family took out hoes and shovels from their houses and carried them on their shoulders. Then they followed the young man out of the Dong family village and headed in a certain direction aggressively. Who was not afraid of death? In the past, they would not even have the thought of resisting those bandits. However, it was different now. If they did not resist, they would starve to death. They had been forced into a dead end. They only had 2 choices, resist or die. If they did not want to die, they could only resist. Fortunately, they had helpers. These benefactors did not seem to be ordinary people. There were over 10 of them. Together with them, the number of people they had was not far behind the One-Eyed Tiger. Dong Family Village. For the survival of the entire village, all the strong young men of the village had been mobilized to fight the most powerful bandits in the vicinity. They swore that they would take back their food. The old, the weak, the women, and the children had all stayed in the village. They stood at the entrance of the village and looked in a certain direction silently. A young child curled up in his mother's arms. He raised his head and asked, "Mom, where did Dad and the others go?" The woman lowered her head and said softly, "Dad and the others went to find food for us. Once they find food, we won't have to starve anymore." Rui City. Li looked down. Yang Luqing, Geezer Wang, Wei Liang, Qin Qing, and several deputies were all there. Even Mississippi Lu found a seat and sat at the back. He nodded, turned around, knocked on the blackboard and said, "Now let's start the class. Today we'll talk about the timing of a rebellion." He cleared his throat and continued, "The timing of a rebellion is very important. Think about it. Has anyone in the Jing Kingdom rebelled now? No one dares to rebel in the Jing Kingdom. What? Is it because the Jing Kingdom is strong and the people live and work in peace and contentment? Is it because they have nothing better to do?" Wei Liang nodded thoughtfully. Li Yi pointed at him and said, "General Wei, answer me. Why hasn't anyone in the Qi Kingdom rebelled?" "Someone in the Qi Kingdom rebelled." Wei Liang thought for a while and said, "A few years ago the first prince of the Qi Kingdom was bewitched by someone. He wanted to implement the Silver of Judgment law in the Qi Kingdom. The country was in turmoil. The officials of several states rebelled. It involved many people. Later it was forcefully suppressed." "Sit down." Li Yi glared at him and said, "The example of the Qi Kingdom's failed rebellion tells us that even a rebellion must be based on principles. When a country is still very strong, blindly rebelling will definitely pay a heavy price. The so-called timing of a rebellion is also the current situation. Several conditions must be met. The world is in chaos, the people have no way to make a living, the imperial court is not trustworthy, the rebels rise together. Obviously this is the current situation of the Wu kingdom. Later, Li Yi found that it was not easy to change their minds with just words on paper. Old Man Wang was an elite among scholars after all. But it was a bit difficult for generals like Wei Liang and Qin Qing to understand. However, they should understand these things the most. Therefore he could only return to his old business and set up a small Jianghu of Silla class. He taught them for an hour every day. Judging from the effect of the lectures these days, the effect was not bad. He looked at the people below who had a look of realization on their faces and spoke again. Before a rebellion, you need to understand the main contradiction of a region. Is it the people and the government, the people and the gentry, or the people and the bandits? Only after you understand the main contradiction can you know what to do next. Only then can you gradually strengthen your troops. Sangzhou Dong Village. A group of old, weak women and children quietly waited at the entrance of the village until the sun was about to set. Suddenly, a loud voice shouted, "They're back! They're back!" Everyone's spirits rose. When they looked up, they saw a group of people walking over from afar. They saw their men and sons walking into the village in high spirits. Their faces were full of smiles, and each of them carried a big cloth bag on their shoulders. Chapter 1079. The villagers of the Dong family village entered the village and placed the food on their backs in an orderly manner at the village entrance. The young man walked out from the crowd and said, "This food was brought back by everyone risking their lives. Everyone can take it and divide it among yourselves." The dozens of men standing behind him revealed looks of shame as they heard this. These food were taken from the hands of bandits, but they weren't the ones who took it. They were just standing on the sidelines watching the fun, cheering and cheering. When they arrived, they were already prepared to perish together with the bandits. But after arriving, they discovered that one-eyed tiger's group of several dozen people wasn't even enough to fight against their benefactor. They couldn't even help. In the end, they could only help their benefactor tie up those bandits. It was unknown where those bandits were taken. The man named Dong Dahai carried several bags of food and placed them to the side. He said, "Benefactor, this is enough for us. If we take more, it will still be taken by others. You can take the rest of the food away." The young man waved his hand and said, "This is your food to begin with. We can't take it. After you take it back, hide it well and don't let others steal it." The Dong family village people lowered their heads in silence. In times of chaos and natural disasters, food was their life. The government wanted food, their families wanted food, and the bandits on the mountain also wanted food. These people wanted their lives. But today, these strangers that they didn't know treated their illness and helped them steal food from the hands of bandits without asking for anything in return. Dong Dahai was the first to kneel on the ground, knocking his head on the ground. The two men beside him looked at each other and knelt down as well. The villagers of the Dong family village knelt down one by one. Whether they were men or women, young or old, or even the ignorant children, all of them had their heads pressed down by their mothers. The young man stood in front and said, "You don't need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank the Heavenly Empress. Remember to live a good life in the future. Don't do evil and do more good deeds. The Heavenly Empress will protect you. If you disobey, we will take back everything that the Heavenly Empress has bestowed upon you." Dong Dahai respectfully said, "Benefactor, rest assured. We will not harm the Heavenly Empress merit." The villagers of the Dong family village also responded. Even after those people gradually left, the villagers were still kneeling on the ground. They looked at the piles of food around them and felt that it was unreal. Dong Dahai took out a portrait from his bosom. This was something that he had requested from his benefactors. This portrait was of the Heavenly Empress. They were only ordinary people and could not do anything for the Heavenly Empress. They could only worship the Heavenly Empress day and night in order to repay her kindness. From today onwards, not only him but everyone in the Dong village would have to erect a long life memorial tablet for the goddess. Recently, a legend had been circulating outside Sangzhou city. The Wu kingdom was in chaos, and the people had no way to make a living. The people suffered from the chaos of war and were homeless. The Empress took pity on the people and descended to the mortal world. She sent her believers to help the people in distress and in danger. She helped the people in Sang Prefecture to treat their illnesses for free and gave them vegetarian meals. Many people were saved. There were common people that had received their kindness and willingly joined them. They swept away the bandits that roamed Sang Prefecture and distributed the food they seized to the poor people. In a short period of time, they received the unanimous support of the local people. The heavenly empress had a benevolent and generous heart. She spread the word of good in the world and also guided the people of Tsang Prefecture to do good deeds and accumulate good karma. She also left behind a prophecy that not long after, a person of the mandate of heaven would appear and save the people of Tsang Prefecture from their misery. In these past years, the common people heard countless people proclaim themselves as people of the mandate of heaven. Without exception, these people were all exterminated by the imperial court. These people said that they would help the common people, but they actually stole food from the common people and went around capturing people. A long time ago, the people of Tsang Prefecture no longer had any expectations for this so-called person of the mandate of heaven. However, the heavenly empress was different. She never desired anything from the common people. She filled the stomachs of the common people and cured their illnesses. The common people believed in her and supported her. When she said that a person of the mandate of heaven would come and save them from their misery, many common people longed for the arrival of this person. Tsang Prefecture City, Provincial Governor's Mansion. A person of the mandate of heaven? The Tsang Prefecture's provincial governor slammed the table and said with dissatisfaction, Investigate thoroughly for this official, find out who this group of people is." With such a force appearing outside of Tsang Prefecture City as the provincial governor, he naturally could not let his guard down. The situation in Tsang Prefecture was chaotic enough. He was the provincial governor in name, but he could only do as he pleased in the prefecture city. Once he left the prefecture city, he would be restricted by those powerful people. It wasn't easy for the imperial court to take down Tsang Prefecture. If there were any unforeseen events here and a few more rebels were born, this provincial governor who hadn't been a provincial governor for long would most likely meet his end. This so-called holy religion that led people to do good must be nipped in the bud. After finishing this matter, he still had to think of a way to find Princess Duanrong's whereabouts. His Majesty had sent him several secret letters, ordering him to find Princess Duanrong at all costs. Unfortunately, the fringe was easy to enter but hard to leave. If he couldn't send troops in, where would he find her? Unless Princess Duanrong could walk out of the fringe on her own and stand before him, he didn't think such a pie falling from the sky would happen to him. In the fringe, Li Yi had just sent off Yang Liuqing and his entourage. In the end, what was learned on paper was still shallow. Rebellion was not something that could be accomplished with words alone. He had already taught them everything that needed to be taught. It was time for them to put it into practice. Tsang Prefecture was the closest to the fringe. It was a place that they had to fight for. Once they conquered and stabilized Tsang Prefecture, the fringe would become their stable support. As long as the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom hadn't swept away all the obstacles in the Wu Kingdom, they would be invincible. They had just set off today, but the arrangements in Tsang Prefecture had already begun several months ago. The holy religion wanted to establish a branch in the Wu Kingdom. Su Zheng couldn't wait to personally lead his men there. The philosophy of the holy religion had long changed to that of helping the needy. They recruited a portion of the people, wiped out the small gangs of bandits in Tsang Prefecture, and distributed all the food and belongings they obtained. Of course, they weren't doing this out of selfishness. There was a difference in the treatment between the followers of the holy religion and the common people. In just a few short months, their troops grew from less than 100 people to a terrifying number. And those bandits and tyrants were all brought into the fringe and turned into productive forces. In these 2 months, Li Yi also deeply understood why the countless rebellious bandits in history would first establish their own religion before they rebelled: a rebellious disciple, a protective master, a lunatic who only wanted to strengthen the holy religion and spread its teachings, and a group of martial arts experts who had long been trained to the point of wanting to see the world plunged into chaos. With Tsang Prefecture as the starting point, who knew how much chaos they would stir in the Wu Kingdom in the end? Li Duan ran over from afar and ran to his side. He asked, Daddy, have auntie and senior sister left?" Li nodded and said, "Let's go." Li Duan heaved a sigh of relief and murmured, "They're finally gone." Li patted his head and asked, "Are you happy that auntie and senior sister left? If I don't train properly, auntie will spank Dwayner's butt." Li Duan rubbed his butt and said excitedly, "I'm going to play with little sister and auntie." Li Duan's fear of Rui was innate. Now that Rui had left with them, he could completely let go of himself. Li looked down the mountain. The path down the mountain twisted and turned until it disappeared into the shade of a forest. Somewhere in the mountains ahead, a troop of nearly 1,000 people was moving slowly. Wei Liang gripped the saber in his hand tightly. The saber was so sharp that it could cut through iron like mud. It was the first time in his life that a troop of 500 soldiers was equipped with such a divine weapon. Apart from that, they were also equipped with the heavenly punishment that struck terror in the hearts of countless people on the battlefield. It was an invincible weapon for sieging cities and killing enemies. However, this was just a precaution. The mission given to them by Prince Jianghu of Silla was to take down Song Prefecture within a month without shedding a drop of blood. He looked up in a certain direction and clenched his fists. Song Prefecture. We're back. Chapter 1080. We haven't eaten for 3 days. Be kind and give us something to eat. Have pity on us. Outside of Jianghu City, in a tea house by the side of the official road, a dozen or so refugees, dressed in rags and covered in dust, were leaning against a low mud wall. They held a broken bowl in their hands and weakly repeated the same words. Jianghu had always been in turmoil. Some of the commoners had lost their homes and were living a difficult life. They could only flee in all directions. Refugees like this were a common sight along the official road. The tea house's waiter was annoyed by the noise. He walked over with large strides and kicked one of the people by the wall. He said angrily, go away, don't disturb our business. This tea house was opened by the side of the official road. Because of the bandits nearby, they hadn't opened for business for half a year. A few days ago those bandits were taken care of by someone. They only dared to open the tea house again after observing for a long time. However, these refugees who couldn't be chased away, were lying there like mud, affecting their business. They are all pitiful people. Why make things difficult for them? In the tea house, a man couldn't stand it anymore. He took out a few pieces of dry rations from his bag and distributed them to the refugees. He pointed in a certain direction and said, follow this official road and walk another 30 li forward. There is a village called Dong Village. Go there and do some work. At the very least you will be able to make a living. It is still early, so don't delay on the road. You should arrive before the sky turns dark. Thank you. The group of refugees immediately knelt down and kowtowed to express their gratitude. After a few kowtows, they got up and walked in the direction that the man had pointed. The waiter was happy to see this. He shook his head and went back to his work. The man also sat back down. A person sitting beside him suddenly asked in a low voice, General Wei, it's already so late. Why isn't General Fan here yet? Did something go wrong? Wei Liang drank a cup of tea and said, what's the hurry? There are still 15 minutes. Blind Fan always delays things to the last moment. Wei, I heard you bad-mouthing me from afar. I haven't seen you for more than a year and you've only gained this bit of skill. A loud voice came from outside the door. A man walked in and sat across from Wei Liang. This man was tall and mighty. One of his eyes was blind, and a knife scar ran diagonally through his eye, making him look somewhat terrifying. Behind him there were more than 10 people on horseback. A murderous aura spread out, causing the few people in the shop to feel nervous. Wei Liang glanced at him and said lightly, I haven't seen you for more than a year. Blind Fan, you've become more capable. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that you're a bandit from somewhere. The waiter of the tea house walked over nervously and asked in a trembling voice, Sir, what would you like to order? Wei Liang placed a few coins on the table and said to the one-eyed man, let's talk outside. The group walked out of the tea house and went down the official road. They walked straight into a forest not far away. Wei Liang stopped in his tracks. The people behind him dismounted their horses and knelt on one knee. They said loudly, Greetings, General Wei. Wei Liang waved his hand and they immediately stood up. The one-eyed man took a step forward and asked in a deep voice, Where's the princess? Her Highness has arrived at Song Prefecture. Wei Liang looked at him and said, When we were suppressing the bandits, we heard that there was a powerful blind guy who occupied a mountain a year ago and subdued all the forces within a 30-mile radius. We guessed that it was you. The one-eyed man nodded and asked again, The people of Song Prefecture are saying that His Highness King Jing was assassinated. Is this true? Wei Liang nodded and did not deny it. The one-eyed man's expression changed. Then His Highness? Wei Liang waved his hand. Just treat it as if His Highness King Jing is already dead. The one-eyed man took a few steps back and said in shock, Then even if King Jing is dead, we still have the princess. Wei Liang looked at him and said, Do you think that Her Highness is not as good as King Jing? The one-eyed man wanted to say something, but Wei Liang waved his hand and said, If there's anything, we'll talk when we see the princess. Some people let go of their horses and rode with the people beside them. Wei Liang and a few of his subordinates got on their horses and rode on the official road. The group of people galloped away, kicking up a cloud of dust. In a remote village in a county in Song Prefecture, the horses stopped in front of the village entrance. The one-eyed man dismounted and looked into the village with an excited expression. Wei Liang looked at him and said, "Let's go." "Greetings, Her Highness." A moment later, in the courtyard of a house in the village, the one-eyed man knelt on one knee. The muscles on his face trembled and he could not control his excitement. "Get up." Yang Liuqing smiled and said, "General Fan has worked hard for the past year." After the one-eyed man stood up, he shook his head and said, "As long as Her Highness is fine, it's not hard for me." He also met a few deputy generals that he was familiar with and Prime Minister Wang. Before he had time to rest, he was pulled aside by Wei Liang. "Didn't you want to ask about His Highness King Jing?" Wei Liang looked at him and said, "Indeed, King Jing is not dead, but he can no longer support our great cause." After a moment, the one-eyed man came back to his senses. He sighed and said, "I've been worried about this for a long time, but I didn't expect that even Prime Minister Wang wouldn't be able to let King Jing walk the right path." After saying that, he looked at Wei Liang with bright eyes and asked, "What you said just now, is it true? Her Highness really plans to rise up?" Wei Liang looked at him and asked, "What do you think?" A sneer appeared on the one-eyed man's face and he said, "Except for Her Highness, I won't listen to anyone." Wei Liang nodded, but the one-eyed man looked at the thing hanging in front of his chest and asked, "What is this?" Wei Liang took the third eye, given to him by Jianghu of Silla, and handed it to the one-eyed man. The one-eyed man held it in his hand and looked at it for a long time until Wei Liang taught him how to use it. He opened a small lid and brought it close to his eyes. He could even see the expressions of people a few hundred steps away. This is the monocular of the Jing Kingdom." He looked at Wei Liang and said in shock, "This thing is hard to buy. Where did you get it?" "What is this?" Wei Liang looked at him with some disdain and said, "Lend me your saber." A vigilant expression appeared on the one-eyed man's face and he asked, "What do you want my saber for?" "We are friends, but I won't give it to you. We haven't seen each other for a long time. Let me broaden my horizons." Wei Liang shook his head and said, "Don't worry, I don't want your things." Since Wei Liang said so, the one-eyed man had no choice but to untie the long saber at his waist. Wei Liang held it with one hand and pulled out the saber at his waist with the other. After a few sounds of metal clashing, a few cracks appeared on the one-eyed man's saber. Under the one-eyed man's incredulous gaze, he handed his saber to him and said, "It's just a pile of scrap metal. Don't say it's a saber. The saber is for you. Don't embarrass Her Highness when you go out." The one-eyed man held the saber in his hand tightly and looked at it carefully. He raised his head to look at Wei Liang and asked seriously, "Tell me honestly what happened in the past year?" Wei Liang smiled and said, "Come here, I'll show you something good." The two of them walked into a house. When they came out again, the expression on the one-eyed man's face could no longer be described as just shock. "Tianfe." He looked at Wei Liang and took a deep breath. After a long time he asked, "Damn it, tell me honestly, did you guys steal these things from the Jing Kingdom?" Without waiting for Wei Liang to answer, he revealed an excited expression and said, "With these things, what do we have to be afraid of? There are less than 2,000 soldiers guarding Zhangzhou. With your people, my people, and these Tianfa, we can take Zhangzhou by tomorrow night." "Take Zhangzhou?" Wei Liang looked at him and asked, "What happens after we take Zhangzhou?" "Of course we keep fighting forward." The one-eyed man looked at him and said, "With Tianfa, what do we have to be afraid of?" Wei Liang looked at him and suddenly asked, "Do you know what the main contradiction is and what the secondary contradiction is?" The one-eyed man was startled. He picked his ear and asked doubtfully, "What? Do you know what a unified mind is and what a united front is? Do you know how to establish a revolutionary base, how to fight the agrarian revolutionary war, how to mobilize the strength of the people, how to do diplomatic work and united front work?" The one-eyed man was startled and asked, "What are these?" "You don't know anything. You only know how to fight and kill." Wei Liang looked at him in disdain. He vented the anger that had been in his chest for a long time and asked, "Are you a pig?" Chapter 1081. General Fan really wanted to refute Wei Liang. Wasn't war supposed to be advancing courageously? Killing enemies, breaking cities, fighting all the way to the imperial capital, breaking into the palace, taking down the dog emperor who had usurped the throne, and supporting Her Highness the Princess to ascend to the throne? He had never even heard of any contradictions, ideological battlefront, or base of operations. Precisely because he had never heard of it, he couldn't refute it. He and Wei Liang were old acquaintances. He had always thought that Wei Liang was only slightly better looking than him and had one more eye. When it came to leading troops into war, Wei Liang was no match for him. Otherwise, it would have been Wei Liang and not him who had followed the princess to the east and west. If Wei Liang was better than him in war, he wouldn't have been sent to the fringe to guard the rear. But after not seeing him for more than a year, he couldn't understand what Wei Liang was saying anymore. Not only that, but he also got his hands on so many divine weapons from God knows where. He got the monocular from the Jing Kingdom and Qianfa. If they had these 2 years ago, they wouldn't have lost Sangzhou and wouldn't have fallen to this state. Something that he didn't know must have happened in this 1 year. I'll teach you these things in the future. Wei Liang patted his shoulder and said, send a message back and tell your men to bide their time for now. Her Highness has her own ways to take over Sangzhou. In the future you better keep your tricks to yourself. If this happened in Rui City with your brain, you would only be able to build roads and move stones. General Fan temporarily suppressed the anger in his chest. He thought to himself that he would settle the score with Wei Liang after asking the princess about the ins and outs of the matter. A lady came in from outside and looked at the two. Miss Yang wants to discuss some matters with you. Who is this lady? Her Highness's new maid? She doesn't even call me General, she doesn't know etiquette? General Fan looked at the lady from head to toe and said, she's quite pretty, but she doesn't have a chest or a butt. What a pity. Bai Su walked in front of the two and asked Wei Liang, your friend? Wei Liang's face was solemn. Miss Bai has misunderstood. I don't know him. General Fan was stunned. He turned his head to look at him and asked, Wei, what do you mean by this? Your surname is Fan. I don't know what your surname is and I don't know you either. Don't try to get close to me. Wei Liang waved his hand and said, I'm going to find Her Royal Highness. Miss Bai, please go ahead. With that, he strode away without looking back. Sigh. Just as General Fan said that, he suddenly shivered and felt an inexplicable chill all over his body. He turned his head and saw that the woman was looking at him. She said expressionlessly, I, Bai Su, do not fight with nameless people. State your name. He was startled for a moment, then he laughed, crossed his arms and said, Miss I Fan Xiao have never hit a woman, Fan Xiao? Bai Su looked at him and nodded slightly. Fan Xiao, right? Wei Liang stepped into a courtyard, knocked on the door and walked into the innermost room. There were a few people in the room. Yang Luqing, Elder Wang and Qin Qing were all there. Elder Wang looked outside the door and asked, Where's General Fan? He still has some matters to attend to. Wei Liang shook his head and said, There's no point in calling him to discuss this matter. Let's talk about it later. Elder Wang nodded and said, Our current strength is not strong, so we should try not to attract the attention of the imperial court. Sangzhou is the first step of our great undertaking, so we cannot be impatient. There are 9 counties in Sangzhou, so we should plan 1 county at a time. Finally, we will encircle the provincial capital. We must remember what Jianghu of Silla said, build high walls, accumulate grain and slowly become king, from how to take down Sangzhou with the least amount of effort, to how to forge Sangzhou into an impregnable base, to how to achieve victory in the entire Wu country step by step. They had already gone through tens of hundreds of simulations and established a general plan. What they needed to do now was to implement the plan step by step. Wei Liang. Here. I order you to take down Qing County within half a month. Do you have any objections? Yes, sir. Qin Qing. Here. After an hour, Wei Liang walked out of the courtyard and walked to the front of another courtyard. He asked the guard standing at the door, Where's General Fan? The soldier swallowed his saliva and said, Inside. He walked 2 steps, then turned back and asked, Where's Miss Bai? Miss Bai left an hour ago. Wei Liang nodded and pushed the door open. He immediately saw General Fan sitting on the ground, leaning against the courtyard wall. He was covered in dust, and his eyes were listless as he looked ahead. At this moment, General Fan looked no different from the refugees he had met. He sighed and walked forward, wanting to help him up. Don't move. General Fan, who was paralyzed, suddenly shouted. 2 streams of turbid tears fell from his eyes. He sniffled and said in a sad voice, My arm is broken. Crack. Wei Liang helped him reattach his arm and helped him into the room to sit down. He sighed and said, In the future, whenever you meet someone you don't know, especially a woman, You better watch your mouth. General Fan opened his mouth in disbelief. Is she really a woman? Wei Liang thought for a moment and said, I forgot to tell you just now. If you meet any woman here, don't take the initiative to provoke them. If you really fight, even Her Highness is not a match for them. General Fan nodded in hindsight and couldn't help but ask, who are these people? It's a long story. Wei Liang shook his head and said, too many things have happened in the past year. I'll tell you one by one. In the room, sounds of surprise could be heard. What? Plum's Art of War. You met the real person and listened to his teachings. He also gave you the Qinli mirror? Her Highness is his martial niece. He wants to help us rebel? You have a secret weapon that is even more powerful than heaven's punishment. Wei Liang enjoyed General Fan's surprised expression very much when he was telling the story. When General Fan first learned about these things in terms of performance, he was just a little better than him. The two of them had followed Her Highness the Princess for a long time. Their statuses were similar and they were both generals, so it was inevitable that they would compare themselves to each other. When they met again, he felt extremely carefree when he realized that she had crushed him in all aspects. General Fan finally calmed down and looked at him and asked, Prime Minister Wang asked you to take over Qin County in half a month. Can you do it? Do you need my help? No need. Wei Liang simply waved his hand to show his refusal. Qin County was only a small county in Sangzhou. There was no army stationed in the county. Almost all the troops in Sangzhou were in the state capital. If someone broke through the state capital, these small counties would inevitably fall. Other than some strong people who served in the army and the 3 groups of officials in the county government, Qin County had no other power. Moreover, they had infiltrated each of the 9 counties in Sangzhou. Countless people were there backing, and the small groups of bandits in the country had almost been subdued by them. With the help of those martial arts masters, it was not difficult for them to take down a county. Then I'm relieved. General Fan nodded and asked again, oh right, that lady just now, what's her background? Wei Liang explained, that is Miss Bai Su. Miss Bai is a friend of Her Highness. Her martial arts are extremely high. Even Her Highness is no match for her. You have not seen Her Highness's master. Miss Lu is the real powerful one. General Fan nodded and said, Miss Bai is beautiful and has a good figure. She looks soft and weak, but I didn't expect her to be so powerful. Wei Liang couldn't help but laugh and said, I admit that Miss Bai is beautiful, but if you say that she has a good figure, he patted General Fan's shoulder and said, Old Fan, when did your other eye become blind? Nonsense. General Fan slapped his hand away and said, I think Miss Bai is good in every aspect. Wei Liang waved his hand and said, Hey, you don't understand. A woman like Miss Bai with no breasts and no buttocks will not be easy to have children. Whoever marries her will be unlucky. General Fan cupped his hands and said, You have the guts to say that to Miss Bai. If you have the guts to say it to her face? Wei Qing glanced at him and said, Do you think I am stupid? I only dare to say it when there is no one else here. If I say it in front of her, wouldn't I be courting death? You are not stupid. General Fan looked at him and said with a smile, If you are not stupid, look back. Chapter 1082. Because General Wei was unwell, the task of taking down Qin County within half a month fell on Deputy General Qin Qing. General Fan hadn't been with them for more than a year, so he was behind in thinking and couldn't keep up with the pace of the times. Prime Minister Wang specifically told them to eat and live together in this half a month. Wei Liang's task became to help General Fan improve the quality of thinking. Ordinary soldiers just followed orders and didn't have high requirements, but as a general, he couldn't be lax in thinking. In the temporary residence, Yang Luqing sat at the table and slowly flipped through the pages of a book. She read every line of words very carefully. General Wei and General Fan only needed to know how to fight a war, but she was different. Not only did she need to know how to win the first battle, but she also needed to know how to strengthen her troops. She needed to know how to survive in the cracks when her forces were still weak. She needed to start from Sangzhou and approach the place that had given her countless nightmares step by step. She even had to think about some more distant things. One day, if she really sat on the throne, what should she do? How could she be a good emperor? She never doubted whether she could do it or not. If Uncle Master said it was possible, then it was possible. Prime Minister Wang knocked on the door and walked in. Your Highness. After a slight salute, he said, Qin Qing has gone to Qin County. He used to be stationed in Sangzhou, and Qin County is his hometown. Our people have already infiltrated the county government, and Envoy Su will also provide us with help. With Miss Bai's help, it shouldn't be a big problem to take down Qin County government quietly. Got it? Yang Liuqing nodded. Qin County, including the entire Zhangzhou, was almost abandoned by the imperial court. Only about 1,000 soldiers were stationed in the capital of Zhangzhou. She only needed to lead 50 elite soldiers to occupy Qin County government. Qin Qing had many masters on this trip, so she wasn't very worried. Prime Minister Wang looked at the open book on his table and sighed, "Your Highness has worked hard these years. Ever since the second imperial prince usurped the throne, he had watched helplessly as the defenseless girl took the young imperial prince Jing and escaped from the imperial capital. They hid all over the place and slowly grew up to become the princess that she was today. He had seen how much hardship she had suffered along the way." Yang Liuqing shook his head and said with a smile, "It's the Prime Minister who's tired. You're already so old but you still have to run around with us. It's us who've dragged you down?" Prime Minister Wang waved his hand and said, "I'm tired but I'm willing to be tired. If I can see the day your Highness ascends to the throne, I'm willing to die of exhaustion." Yang Liuqing smiled and discussed some matters with him before saying, "I'll go and see Master." Prime Minister Wang watched her walk out. He caught a glimpse of the elegant handwriting on the open page on his desk, and his gaze slightly paused. He looked outside the door. The princess from 2 years ago was very different from the one she was now. 2 years ago, although she had also tried her best to fight and work very hard, she was confused and had no direction at that time. Now she would no longer show that kind of confusion and helplessness. There was someone who pointed the way for her, the way for all of them. When Yang Liuqing walked into the next room, Mississippi Lu was looking at the autumn water in a daze. "Master." She walked over and said softly. Mississippi Lu came back to her senses and asked, "Bai Su and the others have left?" Yang Liuqing nodded and said, "They just left with General Chen." She looked at Mississippi Lu and said, "Master, there's nothing to do here for the time being. Why don't you go back to Rui City first? Bai Su and the others are here. Nothing will happen." Mississippi Lu waved her hand and said, "No need. There's nothing important to do when I go back. What does he want you to do next? Let me see the plan." Not long after, Yang Liuqing walked out of the room and came to the courtyard. He looked into the distance and saw a stretch of mountains. Although there was nothing important there were important people there. It was just that Master was never willing to face them. It had been 5 years since the second year of Jinghe. If time went back it would be even longer. It had been so long that even as a disciple she was worried for her. Zhangzhou, Qin County, the county government. It was late, but the county magistrate of Qin County was still flipping through the files in the front hall of the county government. Recently, Qin County had not been peaceful. Of course, Qin County had never been peaceful. When the Wu Kingdom was still in peace there were mountain bandits here. Now that the Wu Kingdom was in chaos, there were less mountain bandits here, but now there was a rebellion. Those sons of B***Cheese who could not defeat the regular army of the imperial court did not dare to provoke the prefectural city where the army was stationed. Instead, they targeted the soft persimmon like the county government. His predecessor, the predecessor before him, and the predecessor before him, were all hacked to death by the mountain bandits who rushed into the county government. Ever since the country was in chaos, there were people rebelling in all the prefectures. A place like Zhangzhou, which was already chaotic, naturally became even more chaotic. Every once in a while, a few dozen or nearly 100 thugs would rush into the county government and hack down the county magistrate and a few low-ranking officials. They proclaimed themselves Emperor XXX and declared their right to rule over Qin County. Then they would be rewarded according to their contributions and conferred titles. This was how his predecessor, the county magistrate, had died. By the time the prefectural city received the news and sent troops to exterminate those rebels, the county magistrate's death had already passed. Although there were also people who would attack the county government, they would only fight and not occupy it. They would seize food, weapons, and horses. In short, they would seize whatever they saw. After they were done, they would leave and hack down the county magistrate and a few low-ranking officials. This was how his predecessor had died. In short, if there was a rebellion in Qin County, the county magistrate would be the first to suffer. The damned provincial governor had already withdrawn his army to the prefectural city. Small county magistrates like them had to live with their heads tied to their waistbands. If they were not careful, they would become the target of others' rebellion. The reason he could live until now was not because there were fewer people rebelling, but because he was careful enough. Once he discovered a clue, he would immediately flee for his life. Recently in Qin County, there were often illegal gatherings in some villages. Each gathering would consist of dozens or even hundreds of people. In troubled times, as long as there were more than 10 people gathered together, nothing good would happen. This was an iron law, and it was also a bloody lesson he had learned from the deaths of his predecessor, the predecessor before him, and the predecessor before him. If they were discussing a rebellion, he was sure that the county government of Qin County would be their primary target. He could not be an official, but he could not give up his life. This was the life principle he had always followed. Bang! Just as he was carefully reading through the files trying to find some clues, a few muffled sounds suddenly came from outside the front hall. The county magistrate's heart skipped a beat and he blurted out, "Who is it?" No one answered him, and no one from the yamen runners who were usually on duty outside came in. He almost subconsciously ran to the back, where there was a secret passage that he had people dig in advance. No matter what happened outside, he could run outside through that secret passage. He was not curious about what was happening outside. He knew that the most curious people often died the fastest. However, he had just run 2 steps when a black shadow had already blocked his way. The black shadow looked at him and asked, "Are you the county magistrate of Qin County?" "I'm not." He shook his head violently and said, "I'm afraid you have mistaken me for someone else. The county magistrate is now in the inner residence. Do you want me to take you there?" As he spoke, he walked out of the door, thinking that once the yamen runners were alerted, he would be out of danger. In the yard outside the front hall, a yamen runner had a knife against his neck. When he saw the county magistrate coming out, his eyes lit up. He pointed at him and said, "Hero, this is our county magistrate." The county magistrate of Qin County had already cursed the 18 generations of the yamen runners' ancestors in his heart. He turned to look at the black shadow, knelt down with a thud and said loudly, "Hero, please spare my life. I'm not the dog official you are looking for. I didn't do anything evil. The bad things were all done by the county magistrate. It has nothing to do with me. I surrender, I surrender." The black shadow looked at him and stood there, not knowing what to do for a moment. He had already thought about how to force the county magistrate of Qin County to submit if he resisted strongly. He had thought of several ways, but he didn't expect that the county magistrate would surrender on his own before they even said a word. The feeling of punching the air with all his strength was particularly uncomfortable. He looked back at the other person and asked, "Sister Bai, what should we do? Do we still need to separate tendons and break bones? Do we need to use poison?" "Separate tendons and break bones, use poison." Hearing this, the county magistrate of Qin County suddenly blacked out. Chapter 1083. Qin County was a small county. There were only a few hundred households in the county. The county magistrate and the deputy county magistrate had the responsibilities of the registrar and the county lieutenant. They were in charge of more than a dozen bailiffs and some servants. This was why the rebels liked to attack the county government in recent years. They only needed a few dozen people to occupy the county government and make themselves king. They could establish their power without much difficulty or risk. They could easily start the first war of the rebellion. If they attacked the county government, they naturally had to kill a few corrupt officials. Therefore, for a remote county like Qin County, the county magistrate had become a profession with a high mortality rate. The county magistrate of Qin County hugged the man's leg and said loudly, "Hero, what do you want? I will cooperate with you. Please don't kill me, don't kill me. You have no backbone at all. You're not a man." The man looked at him disdainfully and shook him off. He walked to the woman and said flatteringly, "Sister Bai, leave the things here to us. You should go and rest. If I knew it would be so easy, I wouldn't have come. It would be better to learn from the chief." Bai Su glanced at him and turned to leave. The man looked back at another person and said, "General Chen, I'll leave the rest to you." Chen Qing covered his face with a black cloth and walked to the county magistrate of Qin County. He pulled off the black cloth on his face and asked, "County Magistrate Liu, do you still recognize me?" The county magistrate moved closer to the light. When he looked over, he was shocked and said, "General Chen Yu." He fell to the ground and cried, "General Chen, I've been looking forward to the stars and the moon and you've finally come. You don't know how hard my life has been after you left. I've been hoping that Her Royal Highness would come back." The man looked at the county magistrate of Qin County, smacked his lips and sighed, "He's a talent." When the first snow fell in the second year of Jingping, Li Yi threw a letter into the fire. The letter was instantly swallowed by the flames. In the past few months, 7 of the 9 counties in Sangzhou had been secretly controlled by them. The control here did not only refer to the county government, but also the people that Su Jing secretly recruited. Nominally, Sangzhou was still under the control of the provincial governor's office. But in fact, the provincial governor's office had already surrounded Sangzhou. Even inside the provincial governor's office, forces had already infiltrated. There were still 2 counties in the provincial governor's office. In order not to alert the enemy, they had not taken any action yet. Compared to a violent revolution using heavenly punishment and cannons to blast open the city gates, this method of boiling a frog in warm water was more suitable for them now. Once they completely controlled Sangzhou, they could carry out the next step of the plan. Li Yi frowned as he watched the last scrap of paper in the bonfire burn away. After leaving home for a few months, Yang Luqing still frequently wrote letters. Rui actually did not send a single letter back and did not even come back to take a look. It was really a girl who grew wild, too unreasonable. Li Duan, who was wearing a cotton-padded jacket, ran in from outside and asked, "Daddy, when is Auntie coming back?" Li Duan had really forgotten about the pain of his butt. He missed Rui so soon. Li thought about it and said, 2 more months. She will be back during the new year. Li Duan counted with his fingers and realized that there were still 2 months until the new year. He patted his chest and murmured, "She will be back after the new year. I'm relieved." After he finished speaking, he ran out of the room once again. Li shook his head slightly as he watched him run out with happy steps. Li Duan was still young. He only remembered Rui spanking his butt. He did not know how good Rui was. 2 months before the new year, the first snow fell in Sangzhou. In previous years, this was the official opening of the gates of hell for the people who did not have much food in their homes. Every year it was unknown how many poor people would die from hunger and cold. This year was slightly different. Those deranged bandits in Sangzhou had disappeared without a trace. Every county would have a fixed place to distribute porridge. As long as they put in a certain amount of work, they would not be able to fill their stomachs. As long as they had arms and legs, they would not starve to death, and it was enough to sustain their lives. In this year of famine and war, to be able to keep their lives was already a blessing from the gods. No, it was the blessing from the Empress. The Empress was kind and generous. Numerous people in Sangzhou had received her kindness. Many poor people who survived because of her prayed for her blessings day and night. Many people believed in the heavenly Empress words of someone that could save them from the sea of suffering and the chaos of war. But they didn't know when this person that could save them would appear. Your Highness, other than Yong'an County and Ding'an County in the state capital, the other 7 counties in Sangzhou are already under our control. Each county can mobilize more than 1,000 people. General Wei has already personally contacted Envoy Su in the state capital. Miss Bai just said that several brothers from the alliance have already infiltrated the Sangzhou garrison. Qin Qing reported the various matters to Yang Liuqing and cupped his fists. What should we do next? Please instruct your highness. Yang Liuqing thought for a moment and said, 3 days later, occupy the state capital. Qin Qing knelt down on one knee and bowed, yes. Actually, a month ago, they were only a step away from occupying the state capital. Sangzhou's garrison of 2,000 soldiers could not be considered elite soldiers. They were stationed outside the city, but they could mobilize more than 2,000 soldiers. They were all elite soldiers who had survived countless battles. In terms of weapons, they were far superior to the Sangzhou garrison. Moreover, for the Sangzhou garrison that had already been infiltrated, it was not difficult to break through from the inside and the outside at the same time. Qin Qing left in a hurry. He needed to discuss the specific plan of seizing the city with everyone and then deduce all the possible changes and possibilities. Even if he was already fully prepared, he could not let his guard down. Yang Liuqing left the room and walked into the courtyard. Looking at the bustling crowd around her, her heart was exceptionally calm. She did not feel the slightest nervousness or urgency of a great battle. This was the first time in several years. The reason was that they already had a well-thought-out plan for Sangzhou. This was their first battle, and it was also a very important battle. They could only win and not lose. She could not disappoint the soldiers, she could not disappoint her master, and she could not disappoint her martial uncle. Thinking of her martial uncle, her expression froze. She blinked her eyes and rubbed them in disbelief. Her lips parted and she said in disbelief, "Martial uncle." Outside of Sangzhou, there are still 3 major forces that have been in a stalemate with the government. After taking over Sangzhou, the first thing to do is to subdue them. Inside the room, Baisu sat opposite Mississippi Lu and said, "I've already sent people to infiltrate those three forces." Baisu said a few more things. Seeing that she was in a daze and seemed to be distracted, he said, "Chief, I'll go down first." Mississippi Lu nodded. Baisu walked out of the door and met someone at the door. Her eyes widened and she opened her mouth, but before she could make a sound, her mouth was covered. Her eyes widened even more and then she became a little angry. Before she could vent her anger, Li Yi raised his index finger and gestured for her to be quiet. Baisu pushed his hand away and gritted her teeth, but she did not make a sound. Li Yi walked into the room, not deliberately suppressing his footsteps. After all, at such a close distance, if he walked quietly, Mississippi Lu would notice him. Her back was facing the door. Li Yi walked behind her and wanted to cover her eyes, but she reached out and grabbed his wrist. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and asked calmly, "Why are you here?" Baisu stood at the door and saw that the chief's expression was no longer in a daze, and there was a trace of hidden joy. She was completely different from before and he sighed in his heart. "Duaner said he misses you." Li Yi walked to the door and held Li Duan's hand as he walked over and said, "I brought him here to see you." "Auntie?" Li Duan did miss Rui. When he saw her again he was so touched that his voice sounded like he was about to cry. Chapter 1084. Li Yi and Li Duan were not the only ones who came to Zhangzhou. In order to strengthen the cohesion of the holy religion, Ruoqing, as the incarnation of the Empress, couldn't always exist in the portrait. She had to show up in front of the believers. This time Rui and Zueimo didn't come with them. Rui had to stay in Rui City to preside over the overall situation. Li Mu was still young and hadn't weaned yet, so Zueimo couldn't leave. Without a grandmaster following them, they couldn't guarantee their safety in extreme situations. Even if Su didn't want to come to the Wu Kingdom, he followed them to Zhangzhou this time. "What are you doing here?" Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked. Based on her understanding of Duaner, it was impossible for him to miss her. "Duaner said he missed you." "Of course, this is only one of the reasons." Li Yi looked at Li Duan, who hid far away after calling him aunt, and said, "There's nothing to do in the mountains, so I took him out to see the world and see your progress. Zhangzhou hasn't been conquered yet, right?" Mississippi Lu said, "We'll conquer the city in 3 days." "There are still 3 days. There's no hurry?" Li Yi nodded, thought for a moment and said, "Duaner just said he was hungry. Why don't you cook a bowl of noodles for him first? If it's convenient, cook a bowl for me too with more vegetables and more noodles." Whether Li Duan wanted to see Rui for the food she cooked or not, as a father, Li Yi couldn't refuse a reasonable request from a child. He also wanted to see with his own eyes what the current situation in Zhangzhou was like. After the meal they walked through the village. Yang Luqing explained to him, "We've taken down the 7 county governments in recent days. We've also used some means to control the officials in the county governments. Some of the strong people can be used by us in a short period of time. Now only the prefectural city is left." It had been several months since they split up and quietly came to Zhangzhou. In addition, before this, Su Zheng had already brought people here to expand the number of believers. Their progress was not fast. However, this was also Li Yi's intention. To the Wu Kingdom, Song Prefecture was a remote place, but Song Prefecture was close to the fringe. As long as the Wu Kingdom could defend Song Prefecture, no matter how strong the enemy was, they would be able to receive endless reinforcements from the fringe. This was a place that had to be fought for. They had to hold it firmly in their hands and not simply occupy the government office. Otherwise, they would easily end up in the same situation as they did 2 years ago. The remaining snow had yet to dissipate. Walking on the road, one could see many villagers busily working in the village, constructing some strangely shaped buildings. This was a brothel that was about to be built. Any commoner who had a hard time living nearby would come here to work. Even if it was just sweeping the floor or moving wood, they would be able to get 2 meals a day to fill their stomachs. The one-eyed General Fan followed behind them. Looking at the busy people in the distance, he asked in puzzlement, "Your Highness, we are giving out porridge to help the people. Why do we have to make them do all this work? What's the point of building these extra houses? Can't we just give them food?" Prime Minister Wang shook his head and explained, "Because we want the people to know that their porridge and rice are earned through their hard work, not by our charity. It's hard to predict a person's heart. The more we give, the more it will backfire in the end." After saying that, he looked at the one-eyed general and said, Although you are a general, you can't stop learning. When you go back, General Fan, you must read more books. What I just said is written in the books. At this moment, General Fan could only nod in agreement. Although he still had doubts in his heart, he didn't dare to ask further. At this time, two men carrying a piece of wood walked past them. One of them sighed and said, "Tell me, the person with the mandate of heaven that the Empress spoke of, when will he come? When will these bitter days come to an end?" The other man curled his lips and said, "You should be content. Moving logs for a day is enough for your family to eat for several days. What kind of bitter days is this? Who doesn't wish for a better life?" The man paused and suddenly said, "Have you heard that the person with the mandate of heaven that the Empress spoke of can save the people is actually Princess Duanrong?" The man was stunned. He asked, "Where did you hear this?" "Everyone says that when the Empress gave birth to Princess Duanrong, a phoenix landed in the palace and circled around for 3 days before flying away. There are also people who say that Princess Duanrong was able to speak when she was born. When she was born, there was a strange fragrance that wafted for 10 miles. The majority of the imperial capital could smell it. When mortals smelled it, they would feel refreshed and all illnesses would disappear." Someone walked over and heard their conversation. He said in surprise, "Is that true or false? Being born with a human tongue and accompanied by a strange fragrance, that is the sign of a saint appearing in the world." The man carrying the logs shook his head and said, "I don't know if it's true or false, but I've also heard that this is the sign of an emperor. In ancient times, all those who had these signs eventually became emperors." The passerby disdainfully said, "Forget it. Princess Duanrong is a woman. Can a woman become an emperor?" The gaze of the man carrying the logs became even more disdainful. He said, "I said that you are ignorant and inexperienced, but you don't believe me. Let's not talk about the distant past and just talk about the recent past. The emperor of the Jing kingdom is a woman. She governs the country better than men, so why can't the emperor of my Wu kingdom be a woman?" The passerby was startled and asked in surprise, "Is there really such a thing? Why would I lie to you?" The man carrying the logs pretended to be profound and said, "If one person says it's false, then 100 or 1,000 people say it. How can it be false? I have to explain it to you." Not far away, a steward looked over and shouted, "You two, what are you doing? Have you finished moving the logs? Do you want to eat or not? If you don't want to move, there are still others." The man shivered and immediately said, I'm coming. Don't move. Don't touch my logs. If anyone touches my logs, I'll fight them." The passerby was startled for a long time. He looked at a young man passing by and asked, "What he said just now, was it all true?" Li nodded and said, "It's not just that. When Princess Duanrong was born, beautiful stars appeared and auspicious clouds appeared. The Phoenix Cry imperial capital was filled with the emperor's aura. At that time, a wandering Taoist who passed by the imperial palace said that this was the fate of the emperor. A person with this kind of fate would definitely become the emperor in the future." Only when the passerby walked away in a daze did General Fan rub his head and say with some surprise, "When Her Highness was born, I was standing guard at the city gates. At that time there was no phoenix, nor was there any fragrance. As for those beautiful stars and auspicious clouds, that's even more nonsense. Who was the one who spread those rumors? To dare spread rumors about the princess, I'll skin them alive." Wei Liang, who had just returned, looked at him and finally couldn't help but say, "Old Fan, why don't you stop leading the troops and supervise those people moving the logs? That job is easy and doesn't need to use your brain. It's very suitable for you." The one-eyed general was startled and asked, "What do you mean?" Yang Liuqing blushed a little. Although she knew the purpose of the brothel spreading these rumors, she still felt a little embarrassed in front of so many people. Li looked at her and comforted her, "These are all nothing. In the past, there was a shameless fellow who said that he wasn't human and that he would transform into a dragon when he encountered a storm. Those who achieved great things did not bother with trifles. He didn't say that when she was born the word Empress was written on her palm. That was already very restrained. To become an emperor, one must first learn to be shameless. She didn't know how shameless Li Xian was as an emperor. He even needed someone to help manage the country. Let's not think about this for now." He looked at Yang Liuqing and said, "After we take down Cangzhou, we'll be busy for a period of time." Cangzhou's capital. The provincial governor of Cangzhou sneezed and rubbed his nose. He asked, "Have you investigated the matter that I asked you to investigate?" Below, a low-ranking official nodded and said, reporting to Lord, I've investigated everything. That holy religion is nothing more than a group of self-proclaimed chivalrous people. They help the commoners to suppress bandits and distribute food everywhere. They say that they want to punish the powerful and help the people. In troubled times, there were many chivalrous people who lacked a single thought. It was fine as long as they didn't rebel. The provincial governor of Jianghu relaxed and said, I understand. You can leave. This lowly official takes his leave. The low-ranking official bowed and left. The provincial governor of Jianghu couldn't help but sneeze again. He rubbed his nose and mumbled, I didn't catch a cold last night. He stood up. For some reason, he had an ominous premonition in his heart. The low-ranking official walked out of the room and into the courtyard. When he brushed past two bailiffs, he raised his hand slightly and extended 3 fingers. Chapter 1085. Early in the morning, the sky was already bright. There weren't many pedestrians on the bumpy and uneven streets of Jianghu. Jianghu wasn't a large state to begin with and didn't have a large population. In the past 2 years, because of the increasing bandits and wars, the entire city was half empty. Some people had died, some had fled to other places. The people that remained in Jianghu were either unable to leave their homeland or had no relatives to go to. Rather than saying they were living in Jianghu, it was more like they were fighting against the heavens. At a vegetable stall on the side of the street, a woman stopped in her tracks. Carrying a basket, she picked through the vegetables and asked, How much are you selling these radishes? The stall owner sat on the stone steps and raised his head. 2 copper coins per caddy. 2 copper coins? The woman in coarse clothing frowned and said, It was 1 copper coin yesterday. The stall owner glanced at her and lightly said, Yesterday the officials only charged 5 copper coins for blocking the road. Today they're charging 10 copper coins. The price of 1 caddy of radishes had doubled. What should have been a month's expenditure would now be used up in half a month. The woman angrily picked up her basket and said, I'll look at other vendors. She walked 1 round on the street and when she returned, her expression had completely collapsed. This isn't drinking blood and eating meat. They're smashing their bones and swallowing them. These days are almost unbearable. Who said it wasn't? The vegetable vendor finally sighed and said, When Jianghu was occupied by those rebels, the people were the ones who suffered. Now that Jianghu has been taken back by the government, the people are still the ones who suffer. When will these bitter days come to an end? The woman thought about it and said, That might not be bad. 2 years ago, when Princess Duanrong was in Jianghu, everything was quite good. Sigh, what a pity. The stall owner seemed to have thought of something and suddenly said, I heard 2 days ago that Her Highness is going to fight back. The woman put down her basket and said mysteriously, I also heard that Princess Duanrong has been fated to be an emperor since she was young. Just like the princess of the neighboring Jing kingdom, she will become an empress in the future. The two of them talked mysteriously for a while. The stall owner waved his hand and said, Sister-in-law, I see that you and I get along quite well. This is all fate. How about this? I'll sell this dish to you at the same price as yesterday. That's good. The woman smiled and said, Today I have to pick a little more. She picked a whole basket of vegetables and handed it to the stall owner, saying, Weigh it. After the stall owner weighed it, he said, That's a total of 22 copper coins. I'll round it up and give you 20 copper coins. The woman took out her pouch, counted the copper coins and handed them over to him, saying, You count them. The stall owner smiled, kicked the money into his pocket and said, You don't have to count. Are you going to lie to me, sister-in-law? All right then, I'll go back first. The woman waved her hand at him. When the stall owner saw her disappear, he immediately put the money back into his pocket and counted again. It did not matter even if he paid 2 copper coins less, because the price of the vegetables was originally 20 copper coins. He added a small change and wiped off another small change. After counting it twice and looking at the 18 copper coins in his hand, the stall owner fell into deep thought. He sighed. The moral degeneration of the world was getting worse day by day, and people's hearts were no longer what they used to be. The simple and honest customs of Jianghu had been ruined by these people. At this moment, a man who was walking while tightening his belt walked over and asked, Old Wang, did anyone come to buy vegetables just now? The young stall owner kicked the money into his pocket, stood up and waved his hand. He said, No, but a sister-in-law came. She took a long time to pick vegetables, but she thought it was too expensive and didn't buy any more. Sigh, I don't want to raise the price either, but if I don't, I'll have to hand all the money for these vegetables to the government. Say, why can't they learn from the past Princess Duanrong? The man sighed, looked at him and said gratefully, I ate something bad yesterday, thank you for helping me look after my stall. You're welcome. The young man stood up, waved his hand and said, it's nothing. After the young man left, the man counted with his fingers and murmured, today is a good day. He cleaned up the vegetable stall early, returned home and told his wife and children to look after the house well. He walked out of the house, walked around a few streets, and when he arrived in front of the door of a deep residence, he lightly knocked on the door 3 times and said in a low voice, Jianghu assassinates the king of Qin. The door opened and he walked in, closing it on the way. In the spacious courtyard in front, there were already dozens of people gathered together. Another hour passed and from time to time, people would come in from outside. At some point, someone counted the number of people. Everyone stood in an orderly manner in the courtyard, and a young man walked out from inside. Everyone bowed and said, greetings, Envoy Su. No need to be so polite. The young man waved his hand and said, I won't say much nonsense. The guards outside the city are obstructing us. Tonight, our mission is to attack the provincial governor's manor. Our people are already prepared inside the provincial governor's manor. You must remember we are different from those rebels. After attacking the provincial governor's manor, you are not allowed to rob or kill. If there is a violation, you will be punished according to the sect rules. Yes. Everyone answered in unison. In the provincial governor's manor, for some reason, the Zhangzhou provincial governor kept feeling uneasy tonight. The sky had already darkened. He walked out of the hall and into the courtyard, pacing back and forth anxiously. A figure walked into the courtyard from outside and walked to his side, asking with concern, Darren, what's wrong? The Zhangzhou provincial governor looked at the advisor beside him and asked, is there still no news of Princess Duanrong? These days he had not paid attention to the rumors regarding Princess Duanrong in Zhangzhou city. However, the rumors had spread like wildfire, and the entire city was in an uproar. He finally started to feel uneasy. When the advisor heard this, he smiled and said, Darren is worrying too much. These things are just the product of those ignorant people's groundless accusations and extreme exaggerations. Could it be that Darren also thinks that Princess Duanrong can become the emperor? When the Zhangzhou provincial governor heard this, he felt slightly more at ease. He thought and then said, there are no waves without wind. The groundless accusations also have their roots. We cannot let down our guard. Have the city guard strengthen the defenses these days? The advisor nodded and said, yes, I'll go make the arrangements now. Also, send people to put up Princess Duanrong's portrait. Put up more outside the provincial city as well. Anyone who discovers any clues will be rewarded with 1,000 taels of silver. Understood. The Zhangzhou provincial governor waved his hand and said, all right, go make the arrangements. Seeing the advisor leave, he stroked his beard. He did not want to stay in a place like Zhangzhou for another moment. If he could capture Princess Duanrong, what awaited him would be a bright future. The advisor walked out of the courtyard and brought 2 bailiffs to the gates of the provincial governor's manor. He said to the people guarding the gates, the provincial governor has orders to step up the patrols these few days. There are not enough people in the city defense. You guys should go as well. Leave this place to the 2 of them. The people did not suspect anything. After respectfully replying, they immediately left. At the same time, the Zhangzhou provincial governor returned to the hall. When he saw the sudden appearance of a few people, his footsteps paused. A young lady at the very front looked at him and asked, you were looking for me? After being startled for a moment, the Zhangzhou provincial governor's expression changed drastically. He immediately turned and left the hall. At this moment, the provincial governor's manor was already in chaos. Outside the city, flames soared into the sky, and there were faint sounds like thunder. Chapter 1086. The Zhangzhou provincial governor stood in the courtyard. When he saw several figures walking out of the hall, his legs went soft and he collapsed to the ground. General Wei, General Chen, Duke, Princess? He finally realized where that ominous premonition in his heart these past few days came from. They fought back again. The provincial governor's manor was already in chaos. Those rebels rushed in. No, they didn't seem like rebels. They were organized and disciplined. They didn't smash or rob. They only controlled the bailiffs and officials of the provincial governor's manor. There were only several dozen bailiffs in the provincial governor's manor. In front of these several hundred people, they didn't have the slightest ability to resist. Very soon, the noisy provincial governor's manor calmed down. A long time had passed, but there was still no movement from the 2,000 soldiers responsible for the security of the provincial governor's manor. The Jianghu provincial governor raised his head and looked outside. The place where the flames were soaring into the sky was the direction of the barracks. The only explanation was that when the provincial governor's manor was attacked, they were also attacked, and they couldn't even protect themselves. That deafening thunder and flames made him involuntarily recall the tragic scene of corpses strewn all over the Thorns Ridge that night. His entire body trembled like a sieve. Everyone in the provincial governor's manor gathered in one place. Qin Qing walked over and waved his hand saying, "Take them away first." Attacking the provincial governor's manor was not difficult at all. The people guarding the gates were their own people, and they had long since familiarized themselves with the terrain and defenses inside. The strong citizens lying in ambush around the provincial governor's manor could catch them off guard in an instant. Wei Liang walked to the entrance of the manor and asked in a loud voice, "How is the situation outside the city?" In the distance, General Fan laughed heartily as he dismounted from his horse and said, "There's heavenly punishment, divine weapons and 2 captains on our side. Furthermore, there's a surprise attack working together from the inside and outside. If we still can't win this kind of battle, I, Old Fan, will cut off my own head and let you sit on it." He strode in front of Yang Liuqing, knelt on one knee and said loudly, "Reporting to your highness, I have captured all of Jianghu's 2,000 soldiers. Our side has suffered 23 casualties, no serious injuries and no deaths. In a battle of this level, it was already a miracle that only 20 or so people were lightly injured." However, considering the circumstances of the ambush, the difference in equipment, and the fact that 2 of the 4 lieutenants had defected, the first thing they did when they attacked was to take down the general and the other 2 lieutenants. As a result, the Jianghu garrison had no one to command them and was in a mess. This result was nothing to brag about. The thunder and fire outside the city had long since stopped, but within Jianghu city, almost no one was sleeping. Be it the commoners or the gentry, all of them had closed their doors. Through the cracks of their doors, they looked at the troops hurrying through the streets. Their faces were filled with worry and panic. They had been rooted in Jianghu for many years. How could they not know what this represented? They had seen this scene too many times. Someone had broken through the city gates and occupied the provincial governor's office. Jianghu was going to change again. After daybreak tomorrow, this Jianghu would no longer be the Jianghu of today. They didn't know who had broken through the city, and they didn't know how those people would treat the commoners in Jianghu city. They didn't even know what their future would be, but there was one thing that was beyond doubt. Tonight, no one in Jianghu city would be able to sleep peacefully. Wei Liang, Qin Qing, Fan Xiao and the others also didn't sleep for the entire night. They were busy dealing with the aftermath and harvesting the fruits of victory. Once they completely took over Jianghu, there were even more things that needed to be done. Governing Jianghu, expanding the troops, repairing the city walls, defending against enemies that could appear at any time. Taking over Jianghu city was only the first small step of their great undertaking. The sky had just brightened when some commoners who hadn't slept for the entire night saw through the cracks of their doors that some people were putting up something on the streets. What made them curious was that among these people, there were actually people that they knew from the streets. Seeing these people walking back and forth, someone finally couldn't bear it anymore and opened a small crack in the door of his house. He shouted at the person who was putting up a notice at the end of the street, "Hey Zhang Depeo, what are you doing? You still dare to go out at this time? Do you want to die?" A man pasted the notice at the end of the street and then jumped up and patted it with all his might. After patting it firmly, he turned his head and looked at the man. He said in astonishment, "Why do I want to die? I'm just putting up a notice. It's not like I'm blocking anyone or hindering anyone. It's not illegal. What notice are you putting up?" The man opened the door wider and asked doubtfully, "Aren't you afraid that the people who entered the city yesterday would capture you? Last night, I saw from the window that they even captured the provincial governor." The man called Zhang Depeo grinned and said, "Capture me? Hee, you don't know who was the one who tied the rope on the provincial governor's body yesterday." The man opened the door wider and asked doubtfully, "What does this have to do with you? Could it be that you were the one who tied the rope?" To tell you the truth, the rope on the provincial governor's body yesterday was tied by a brother beside me. Zhang Depeo said with some regret, Sigh, if I wasn't busy tying up another dog official yesterday, this good thing would have fallen on my head. What do you mean? The man walked out of the house and looked at Zhang Depeo. He asked in astonishment, could it be that you also participated in the rebellion? Who was the one who fought their way in last night? What rebellion? Zhang Depeo waved his hand and said unhappily, let me tell you, the one who rebelled was the current dog emperor. He killed my father and big brother. We followed Her Highness to quell the rebellion. If you don't know anything, don't talk nonsense. What did you say? The man was stunned and asked, you said that the one who fought their way in last night was Her Highness? Princess Duanrong is back? Zhang Depeo nodded and said, that's right. Otherwise, why would I put up this thing early in the morning when I had nothing to do? The man looked at the notice and asked, what does it say? I don't know what it says. Zhang Depeo scratched his head and said, but I heard that Her Highness wants to recruit people to repair the city walls. Meals will be provided and money will be provided. If they follow Her Highness to quell the rebellion, participate in the revolution and make contributions, they will be given land when they return. While the man was stunned, Zhang Depeo stuffed a stack of notices into his hands and said, don't just stand there. If you have nothing to do, help me put up these. I'll treat you to lunch at noon. At this moment in the streets and alleys of Jianghu City, someone held a large paper tube in his hand and walked through the streets, shouting all the way. Recruiting, recruiting. Repairing the city walls at the south gate. 10 copper coins a day. Wages will be paid daily. 2 meals will be provided. Those who are interested can go to the government office to sign up. The number of people is limited. First come, first served. Recruiting, recruiting, Her Highness is recruiting. Join the army today, get your pay tomorrow, and you will be given land in the future. The commoners hid in their homes. They couldn't see the notice, but they could understand the human language. They were shocked. The one who fought their way into the city last night was Princess Duanrong? Her Highness was back? Everyone said that the person with the mandate of heaven was coming. Could it be Her Highness? Yes, it must be. When Princess Duanrong was born, she was protected by a phoenix. Even the stars in the sky said that she didn't have an ordinary life. She was blessed by God. Wasn't this the person with the mandate of heaven? They didn't believe in the government or anyone else, but they believed in the princess. They prayed to the stars and the moon every day, hoping for this day. They hoped that Her Highness would come back to save them. An old man pushed open the door and walked to the street. He stopped a soldier who was holding a paper tube and asked with a trembling voice, is Her Highness back? The soldier nodded. The old man sat on the ground and cried, Her Highness is back. We've been waiting for Her Highness to come back. More and more commoners walked out of their homes and onto the streets. They looked at the notices in the city and looked at each other in confirmation. The whole city was in an uproar at this moment. The whole city was jubilant. Her Highness is back. Her Highness is finally back. Our bitter days are coming to an end. It turns out that Her Highness is the person with the mandate of heaven. It turns out that the person with the mandate of heaven is Her Highness. I want to join the army. I want to follow Her Highness to conquer the world. Even God said that Her Highness is the life of an emperor. She will definitely succeed. I still have an old mother at home. I can't follow Her Highness. I plan to sign up to build the city wall and make the wall thicker so that no one can break in. Overnight, the Jianghu provincial governor's mansion had been changed into the Princess Mansion, which was also the temporary command center of the Revolutionary Army. In front of the Princess Mansion, the commoners of Jianghu gathered. An old lady with a hunched body carried a basket and said, Sir, I'm not going to see Her Highness. This old lady doesn't dare to disturb Her Highness. This basket of eggs was laid by the old hen at home. Please help me to bring them in. This old lady has no strength to build the city wall or fight. This is a small gift for the soldiers to nourish their bodies. A strong man carried half a bag of pork on his back and put it on the steps of the door. He said, This meat is for the soldiers. I won't sell meat in the future. I will join the army tomorrow. These few bolts of cloth are for the soldiers to make clothes. These 2 fishes were just caught yesterday. I can't take out anything else. This is a small gift. The crowd consciously moved forward bit by bit. People said 1 or 2 words or simply said nothing. They put down the things and turned to leave. The people's hearts and destiny. Li and Mississippi Lu sat side by side on the roof. He patted her thigh and pointed to the crowd below. He sighed and said, Do you see? This is the real person with the mandate of heaven. Chapter 1087. The status of Yang Liuqing in the hearts of the Zhangzhou people was far beyond Li Yi's expectations. If the current emperor of the Wu kingdom could achieve such a status in the hearts of the people, then the rebels of the Wu kingdom could be easily wiped out without much effort. This, of course, had something to do with the policy of being close to the people during her 2 years in Zhangzhou. Even without the rumors spread by the brothels, the people of Zhangzhou were still hoping that she would return as soon as possible. This would save them a lot of trouble. News had already spread from the various government offices in Zhangzhou. Within Zhangzhou city alone, the people who volunteered to enlist had formed a long queue in front of the 3 government offices. If they held hands, they could probably circle the entire city. Part of the reason was that they could get a tael of silver immediately after enlisting, but another important reason was their trust and support for Yang Liuqing. The number of people who applied to build the city walls was also innumerable. As the base of the rear, the city walls of Zhangzhou had to be especially sturdy. Apart from that, the structure had to be greatly modified to adapt to the new tactics. This project was urgent. The news of the change of ownership of Zhangzhou would soon spread. It wouldn't take long for the imperial court of the Wu kingdom to formulate a strategy and send troops to clear out the city. They needed to build this place into an impregnable fortress before the enemy arrived. Li Yi was initially worried that they wouldn't have enough manpower to deal with certain situations, so he wanted to transfer some people from Rui City over. Now, it seemed that there was no need for that at all. In a short period of time, their troops would be able to expand by more than 10 times. With the support of the fringe, they wouldn't lack food, manpower, or divine punishment. Soon they wouldn't even lack Italian cannons. Even if there were 100,000 soldiers outside, they would be able to wear them down even if they couldn't defeat them. Li Yi looked at the increasing crowd below and sighed. Your disciple is very powerful. I know my disciple is very powerful. Mississippi Lu looked at him and shifted her gaze to his hand. What does this have to do with you putting your hand on my leg? Li Yi couldn't say that he was afraid of heights. When Mississippi Lu brought him up, she didn't consider his opinion. If he didn't grab something with his hand, he wouldn't feel at ease. The officials didn't want to change and didn't care about governance. They only wanted to squeeze the last drop of blood from the people. The Wu Kingdom's imperial court had long lost its credibility in Zhangzhou. This made it especially smooth when Yang Liuqing took over Zhangzhou. The people lined the streets to welcome them and were extremely cooperative with their work in Zhangzhou. If the citizens of the other prefectures and prefectures of the Wu country were to cooperate as well, then his precious martial nephew would only need to raise his voice and the emperor of the Wu country would only be able to stay in the imperial palace. He might even be killed in his sleep by some eunuch or palace maid. Of course, revolution couldn't be imagined. It had to be done step by step and be down to earth. Li Yi put his hands behind his head and lay down. Looking at the rare blue sky in winter, he suddenly asked, Rui, after we defeat the imperial court of the Wu kingdom and Yang Liuqing becomes the empress, what are your plans? Mississippi Lu had already realized her dream of becoming the king of bandits. Even her disciple was about to realize her dream of becoming a king. The only 2 things in life that hadn't been fulfilled was that as a martial artist, she hadn't become a martial arts master yet. As a woman, she hadn't found the man she could rely on for the rest of her life. The former was an illusory realm that could only be encountered and not sought. It could only be left to fate. The latter couldn't be forced, couldn't be found, couldn't be begged. Although it couldn't be forced, there was an old saying that said, I've been looking for him in the crowd for thousands of times, but when I suddenly look back, he's in the dim light. Made some sense. Mississippi Lu thought for a while and lay down beside him. She said, in this world there are still many places that I haven't been to. Maybe I'll go for a walk alone, wearing fresh clothes and riding a horse, holding a sword. Since the Lantern Festival that year, Mississippi Lu's literacy level had soared at a terrifying speed. She didn't know many words, but now she could casually recite poems and idioms, sometimes quoting from the classics. Even he had to think about it to understand. Now she was wearing fresh clothes and riding a horse, holding a sword, and seemed to be changing into a literary heroine. Mississippi Lu looked up at the sky and said, What about you? Are you going to get to know another princess of the Qi kingdom? Why would I get to know a princess of the Qi kingdom? Li Yi glanced at her and said, When things here are over, I'll go back to the capital and then what? And then? That's not the point. Where were we just now? How can you travel alone with a sword? Jianghu is dangerous and it's too dangerous for a girl to travel alone. On the roof, Li Yi and Rui were talking about life, dreams and romantic things. In the conference room, Yang Liuqing was already discussing the next step of the plan with the higher-ups in the army. Prime Minister Wang stood up and walked to a small board. He said, "Now that we've taken over Changzhou and purged most of the bandits in the city, the conflict between the people, the government, and the bandits has been eliminated. However, for the people, the most important thing is land, the means of production, and the conflict with the rich and powerful landowners. Jiang of Silla's suggestion is that we can't kill them all at once. We should attack some of them and draw some of them to our side." After the old man with the surname Wang finished, Wei Liang stood up and walked to a huge map. He pointed at the area around Changzhou and said, "These 5 provinces are very close to Changzhou. Among them, Nanzhou is an important military town with more than 10,000 soldiers. The other 4 provinces can also gather nearly 10,000 soldiers. In other words, when the news from Changzhou reaches the imperial court, we may be surrounded and attacked by 20,000 soldiers. A revolution can't be built in one place. We have to defend Changzhou, but we also need to expand the war as soon as possible. We need to unite all the rebel forces in these 5 provinces and create even more chaos. The news from Changzhou will soon reach the imperial capital. We don't have much time left." November of the 4th year of Wu Yuan. Everyone in Changzhou was a soldier. Her Highness had entered Changzhou half a month ago. Although most of the people had been waiting for this for a long time, there was no doubt that the imperial court would not ignore this. They would soon face the imperial court's purge. Before this, they needed to build the city walls even thicker, taller, and sturdier. Only then would they be able to stop the incoming enemies. The notice personally written by the former prime minister had already spread throughout Changzhou. The current emperor had killed his brother and father, ignoring the will of the heavens. He had already lost the virtue of an emperor. He had also caused the entire Wu kingdom to fall apart, and rebels were rising everywhere. He was no longer fit to be an emperor. At this time, the emperor's star had fallen, and the celestial phenomenon had given a warning. Princess Duanrong had followed the will of the previous emperor and raised troops to suppress the rebels. This notice had been pasted throughout the streets and alleys of Changzhou within half a day. It was also spread by storytellers in the brothels and gradually spread to even further places. In the great hall within the palace walls of the imperial capital of the Wu kingdom, the martial emperor's face was ashen. In front of the hundreds of officials in the imperial court, he suddenly threw down a memorial. The notice contained within the memorial landed next to the feet of an official. "I really have a good sister. Pass down my order. Order the governor of Nan province to be the great general of white cavalry. He will lead the troops guarding the 5 provinces and immediately set out to recapture Changzhou." He looked down with a sinister gaze and gritted his teeth. "At all costs." Chapter 1088. Stop the rebellion in Changzhou at all costs, dead or alive. The court was silent. All the civil and military officials lowered their heads in silence. Only the martial emperor's angry voice echoed. It wasn't until the court was over and the officials walked out of the main hall and the palace gates that the oppressive atmosphere showed signs of dissipating. An official caught up with the general in front and asked in a low voice, "General Qing, what's going on? Didn't King Jing die a long time ago? What's going on with the rebellion in Changzhou? If you have any questions, you can ask His Majesty personally. I still have important matters to attend to, so I'll take my leave first." The general cupped his hands casually and strode away. The official looked at his back and shook his head helplessly. Princess Duanrong and King Jing had always been thorns in His Majesty's heart. Other than confidants like General Cheng, who dared to mention them in front of His Majesty. No matter how many people in the Wu kingdom rebelled and proclaimed themselves as kings, they were still rebels. However, Princess Duanrong and King Jing were different. They were of the same origin as His Majesty and were both legitimate members of the Wu kingdom. Justice stood on their side. His Majesty was afraid. After 2 years, Princess Duanrong had made a comeback. Changzhou was suddenly seized, and Prime Minister Wang had personally written the surrender document, which revealed almost all his evil deeds to the public. The document had even reached the imperial capital. Before long, all the people in the Wu kingdom would know that their emperor had killed his brother and father and slaughtered his entire clan. He was heartless and could not be tolerated by the heavens. He would be punished by both humans and gods. His Majesty no longer pretended to be close to his brother and was secretive like before. In front of all the civil and military officials, he gave the order to stop at all costs, dead or alive. He wanted to use power and force to shut everyone's mouths. Among the officials who dispersed, some looked calm, some looked confused, and some looked worried. In the rear hall of the palace, the martial emperor stood in the hall and looked at a eunuch. He said, "Add Yangfu's reward to her as well. In addition, add another 100,000 taels of silver. Tell those so-called chivalrous martial artists that anyone who can take Princess Duanrong's head will be rewarded 300,000 taels of silver." The eunuch bowed and said, "Yes, your majesty." "Great ancestor. Great ancestor, great ancestor, you can't go in." Boom. Suddenly, a chaotic sound came from outside the hall, and then the hall door shattered with a loud bang. "Yang Zhe, I shouldn't have let you live in this world from the very beginning." The old man with white hair and beard walked in from outside. He looked at the martial monarch and spoke with a cold and murderous voice. "Imperial uncle." The martial emperor looked at him, smiled, and said, "Of the men of the Yang dynasty, only you and I are left. What does it matter if another insignificant woman dies? Since that's the case, this old man will send you to see your father and brother." A voice that sounded like tearing silk came from within the hall. The white-haired old man disappeared from where he stood, and when he reappeared, he was already in front of the martial emperor. He formed a claw with his fingers and fiercely grabbed at the martial emperor's throat. His speed was extremely fast, and the eunuch beside the martial emperor was sent flying. The martial emperor felt as if he had been locked onto by a powerful aura, and a burning pain came from his throat. Death had never been so close to him. A trace of fear appeared in his eyes as well as a trace of anxiety. Bang! After a muffled sound, the martial emperor took a few steps back and fell to the ground, gasping for breath. A silhouette appeared where he had been standing a moment ago. It was an old woman with a head full of white hair, but there were not many wrinkles on her face. She reached out a hand and grabbed the white-haired old man's wrist. When the martial emperor saw that the old man was stopped, he panted and laughed at the same time. His laughter grew louder and louder. Imperial uncle. Aren't you a master? Aren't you invincible? Kill me, I'm right here, come over." The old man's expression finally changed when his wrist was grabbed. "Grandmaster," this old woman was also a grandmaster. He looked at her and asked with a frown, "Who are you? Why are you interfering in the affairs of the imperial family?" The old woman's expression was calm. She let go of his hand and said calmly, "He still owes me one thing. You can't kill him." The old man's expression became calm. He did not know where Yang Zhe had found this master, nor did he want to know. He looked at her and said, "If that's the case, then let's see if you have the ability to do so." As soon as he finished speaking, his body flickered and went straight for the martial emperor behind the old woman. Bang! Another muffled sound came from within the hall. The old woman's figure was even faster than him. She appeared in front of the martial emperor and blocked his path once again. The smile on the martial emperor's face became even wider and he said mockingly, "Imperial uncle, if you don't hurry over, I'm afraid you can only collect the corpse of your most beloved Princess Duanrong." The white-haired old man stood where he was, but he no longer attacked. Instead, he looked at the old woman with a bewildered and uncertain gaze and asked, "Pursuing Shadow, who are you to Su Tian? You know Su Tian?" The old woman's expression changed for the first time. Her voice suddenly rose and it even sounded a little sharp. This pursuing shadow movement technique was created by that old man when he was young, and it was also the thing that he was most proud of. He often bragged about it and he treated it like a treasure. Back then he didn't even teach this movement technique to me. The white-haired old man looked at him and said in a slightly slow tone, "He actually passed this movement technique to you. Could it be that you're a disciple that he took later on?" The old woman didn't answer him. After the initial excitement, her emotions had already calmed down and she asked, "Are you very familiar with Su Tian?" The white-haired old man said, "When we were young we could be considered to be close friends." The old woman's gaze was blank as she muttered, "Close friends? Back then the two of us were only a step away from becoming a grandmaster. We made a bet on who would be the first to break through that barrier." When the white-haired old man recalled the past, he didn't notice the resentment and jealousy in the old woman's voice at all. He was still talking non-stop. "Back then my cultivation level was even higher than his." He was indignant in his heart, and in order to win against me he cut off all distracting thoughts, abandoned everything and went into closed-door training for several years. The old woman closed her eyes and muttered, In order to win against you, he cut off all distracting thoughts, abandoned everything, and went into closed-door training for several years. She deliberately emphasized the words cut off and abandon. The old man nodded and then asked doubtfully, "Since you're his disciple, did he never mention me to you?" As soon as he finished speaking, his expression suddenly changed. He raised an arm, clenched his other hand into a fist, and suddenly punched forward. Bang! His body flew backward and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He glared angrily at the old woman, who also spat out blood and said angrily, "Are you crazy?" The old woman didn't speak, and what responded to him was an attack that was even fiercer than before. Crazy woman, crazy woman. Stop, if this goes on both of us will only suffer. Stop, I know Su Tian, I know Su Tian. Ever since he arrived at the Wu Kingdom, Su was often in a daze as if he was immersed in some kind of memory. He didn't say anything and Li Yi was too embarrassed to ask. He had been sitting there alone for a long time, and the meat on the drumstick had been eaten clean by him. Even the bones were full of teeth marks. A black dog had been squatting not far away from him since he took the drumstick. The dog's eyes were wide open, and it looked at him without blinking. The dog's eyes were originally full of hope, but now they were close to despair. When Fang walked in from outside, Li Yi finally couldn't help but say, "Go to the kitchen and tell them to add another drumstick for Su later." "I'll add the drumstick later." Fang shook his head and handed a letter to Li Yi saying, "Young master, you should take a look at this first." Li Yi opened the letter and after reading it he shook his head slightly. 300,000 taels of silver to buy the life of his beloved martial nephew. This was the most stingy emperor he had ever seen. Mississippi Lu's disciple, his martial nephew of the Jianghu of Silla, was only worth 300,000 taels of silver? He thought for a moment, looked at Fang and said, "Inform Lu Luo to send out hero posters, offering a reward of 1,000,000 taels of silver for the head of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom, and 10 divine weapons that could cut through hair as if they were mud. They are accepting custom orders and free shipping is included. In addition, 10,000 points on the hero ranking list will be rewarded. You can also customize a novel with the theme of martial arts heroes based on the hero himself, and the novel will be spread in the brothel." That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.